Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My sister had been begging me to visit for months, and I kept making excuses until guilt finally won. October of 2024, a Friday evening, I loaded up my Subaru Outback with an overnight bag and a cooler full of her favorite craft beers and started the 4-hour drive from Nashville to Knoxville. I worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic near Vanderbilt, pulling long shifts that left me too exhausted for much of a social life. Most people from my graduating class had already settled into marriages and mortgages by now, but I was still renting a 1-bedroom apartment and spending my weekends catching up on sleep. That particular Friday, I left later than planned because a German Shepherd came in with a bowel obstruction and I refused to leave until he was stable. By the time I merged onto I-40 heading east, the sun had already bled out behind the hills, and the sky had turned that bruised purple color that always made me drive a little faster. I cranked up the heat and told myself I would be at Candace's place before midnight. The first hour passed without incident. I had a true crime podcast playing through my speakers, some case about a missing woman in Ohio, and I remember thinking how strange it was to find comfort in other people's tragedies. The traffic thinned out past Cookeville, and soon I was one of maybe 3 cars visible in either direction. Tennessee has this way of swallowing you once you leave the cities behind. The hills roll up on both sides like shoulders hunching against the cold, and the trees press so close to the road that your headlights catch nothing but bark and shadow. I stopped at a gas station around 8:30 to fill up and grab a coffee. The attendant was a tired-looking woman with a crucifix tattoo on her wrist, and she told me to drive safe because there had been fog warnings past mile marker 80. I thanked her, topped off my tank, and pulled back onto the highway without a second thought. My mirrors showed nothing but darkness behind me, and I had no reason to think that would change. 15 minutes after leaving the gas station, I noticed headlights appearing in my rearview mirror. That alone meant nothing. Plenty of people travel I-40 at night, truckers mostly, sometimes families trying to make good time while the kids sleep. But these headlights were different. They came up fast, way too fast, and then settled about 10 feet behind my bumper. High beams, the kind that fill your entire car with white light and turn your mirrors into weapons against your own eyes. I tilted the rear view to cut the glare and squinted at my side mirrors, trying to make out the shape of the vehicle. It looked like a pickup truck, older model sitting high on its chassis. I tapped my brakes a couple times, the universal signal for back off, but the truck did not slow down. If anything, it crept closer. I could feel the heat of those headlights on the back of my neck like a physical pressure, and I told myself, this was just some impatient local who wanted me to speed up or move over. I was doing 70 in a 65 zone, which should have been more than enough for anyone. The right lane was empty, completely open, and yet this truck refused to pass. It just sat there inches from my rear bumper, those high beams drilling into my skull. I sped up to 75, then 80, watching my speedometer climb while the truck matched me perfectly. My heart started beating a little harder. I checked my phone and saw 1 bar of signal, barely enough to load a text message. The next exit was 14 miles away according to the last sign I remembered passing. I moved into the right lane, slowing down deliberately, giving the truck every opportunity to blow past me and disappear into the night. Instead, it moved into the right lane behind me. Same distance, same blinding light. That was when the first real spike of fear hit my chest, because I understood that whoever was driving that truck was not trying to pass me. They were following me. I grabbed my phone and tried to dial 911, but the call would not connect. The screen just showed that spinning wheel, searching for a signal that did not exist out here in the gaps between cell towers. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles tight, mind racing through options. The highway stretched ahead in a long straight line with no exits, no gas stations, nothing but guardrails and trees and the occasional mile marker reflecting my headlights back at me. Then the truck accelerated. I watched it swing into the left lane, engine roaring loud enough that I could hear it over my own car. And for one hopeful second, I thought the driver had finally gotten bored and decided to pass. But the truck did not pass. It pulled up alongside me, matching my speed exactly. And then it started drifting toward my lane. Not fast, slow and deliberate, like a predator testing how its prey would react. I jerked the wheel right and heard my tires bite into the rumble strip along the shoulder, that violent vibration shaking through the frame of my car. The truck pulled back into the left lane and I steadied myself, breathing hard, trying to keep my car centered. My side mirror caught a glimpse of the driver for just a moment when we passed beneath an overhead light. Male, broad shoulders, baseball cap pulled low. I could not see his face, just the shape of him hunched forward over his steering wheel. The truck dropped back behind me again, resuming its position inches from my bumper, and I realized he was playing with me, testing my reactions, seeing how I would respond to pressure. I had dealt with aggressive drivers before, road rage incidents where someone cuts you off and screams obscenities through their window. But this was different. There was no anger here, no honking, no middle fingers. Just that truck sitting in my mirrors like a patient animal waiting for its moment. I pressed the gas and pushed my Subaru up to 85, watching the speedometer needle climb into territory I had never driven before on a dark highway. The truck matched me. 90, the truck matched me. I was running out of speed and running out of ideas. A sign appeared in my headlights announcing an exit in 2 miles, some town I had never heard of called Granton. I made a split-second decision and stayed in the right lane, watching the exit approach, waiting until the last possible moment before yanking my wheel toward the off-ramp. My tires screamed against the asphalt as I took the curve too fast, and I felt my car tilt dangerously, the passenger side lifting just slightly before slamming back down. In my rearview mirror, I saw the truck blow past the exit, its brake lights flaring red in the darkness as it tried to slow down. A surge of relief flooded through me. I had lost him. I had actually lost him. The off-ramp deposited me onto a 2-lane state highway surrounded by farmland and scattered houses with their porch lights glowing in the distance. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed feed store and killed my headlights, sitting there in the dark with my engine running, trying to catch my breath. My entire body was trembling. I picked up my phone and saw 2 bars now, enough to make a call, and I was about to dial 911 when headlights appeared at the top of the off-ramp. The truck had circled back. I do not know how. Maybe there was a turnaround somewhere on the interstate, or maybe he drove the wrong way down the shoulder. It did not matter. What mattered was that those headlights were coming down the ramp, moving slow, scanning the road like searchlights. I threw my car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot without turning on my headlights, using the faint glow of the moon to navigate. The state highway curved through fields and past old barns, and I drove as fast as I dared in near total darkness, checking my mirrors every few seconds. The truck's headlights appeared behind me about 30 seconds later. He had seen me. He knew which way I had gone, and then he did something that nearly made me veer off the road entirely. He turned off his headlights too. Now we were both driving blind, 2 dark shapes hurtling through the Tennessee night, and I understood with horrible clarity what he was trying to do. He wanted me to lose track of him. He wanted to come up beside me without warning, to run me off the road when I could not see him coming. I was not just being followed anymore. I was being hunted. I turned my headlights back on because I had no choice. The road ahead curved sharply and I could not navigate it blind. Not at this speed. Not with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The moment my lights came on, I saw the truck in my side mirror. It had crept up into my blind spot, maybe 15 feet behind me and to the left, completely invisible until that second. If I had tried to change lanes, he would have clipped me. If I had slowed down, he would have been on top of me. I screamed, actually screamed out loud in my car, and punched the accelerator. The Subaru lurched forward and I took the curve way too fast, feeling my back end swing loose on the gravel shoulder before the tires caught again. The truck fell back slightly, but only slightly. I could see his outline now in my rear view, that dark shape against the darker sky, pacing me like a wolf running alongside a wounded deer. A mailbox flashed past on my right, then another, and I realized I was passing through some kind of rural neighborhood. Houses sat back from the road behind long driveways, their windows dark, their occupants asleep and oblivious to the nightmare unfolding on the road in front of their homes. I thought about pulling into one of those driveways, laying on my horn, begging someone to help me, but I knew that would mean stopping, and stopping meant giving him exactly what he wanted. If I got out of my car, I was dead. I knew that with a certainty that felt like ice in my veins, so I kept driving, scanning the road ahead for any sign of civilization, any gas station or police station or anywhere with people and lights and witnesses. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat and I grabbed it without looking, hitting the speaker button. It was Candace, calling to ask where I was. I started talking before she could finish her sentence, words tumbling out in a rush, telling her someone was following me. Someone was trying to run me off the road. I did not know where I was. I needed help. I needed the police. She went quiet for a second and then her voice came back sharp and focused. She told me to stay on the line. She was calling 911 from her landline right now. Just keep driving. Just keep talking to her. Tell her every road sign I passed. I had never loved my sister more than I did in that moment. I read off every sign I could see. County Road 114. A mile marker with a number I could barely make out. A faded billboard advertising a church revival from 3 years ago. Candace repeated everything back to me, relaying it to the 911 dispatcher on her other phone. The truck stayed behind me, close but not closing the gap, like he was waiting for something. Then I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but fixed lights, the kind that meant a building, a business, something other than empty farmland. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a large structure with a parking lot, and my heart nearly burst with relief when I recognized what it was. A way station for commercial trucks, the kind with a small office building and those bright fluorescent lights that stay on all night. There was a semi parked in the lot, its cab dark, but its presence meaning someone was probably sleeping inside. I pulled into that parking lot going 60 miles an hour and slammed on my brakes so hard the seatbelt cut into my chest. I threw open my door and ran toward the office building screaming for help, not caring how crazy I looked, just needing to get inside, needing walls between me and whoever was in that truck. The truck had followed me into the parking lot. I heard its engine behind me, heard the crunch of gravel under its tires, and then I heard something else. Sirens. Distant but getting closer. That beautiful wailing sound cutting through the night air. The truck stopped. I turned around, standing in the pool of light outside the way station office, and I watched the driver. I still could not see his face, just that silhouette behind the windshield, that shape that had been hunting me for the last 20 minutes. He sat there for maybe 5 seconds, engine idling, and I knew he was looking at me. I could feel his eyes even if I could not see them. Then he threw the truck into reverse, backed out of the parking lot, and disappeared down the road in the opposite direction. The semi-driver had woken up and was climbing out of his cab, asking me what was wrong, and I just collapsed against the wall of the office building and started crying. The police arrived about 4 minutes later. They found me still sitting there, shaking, trying to explain what had happened while Candace stayed on the phone with me the entire time. They never caught him. I gave the officers everything I could remember. Dark pickup truck, older model, maybe a Ford or a Chevy from the late 90s. Male driver, large build, baseball cap. No license plate because I never got a clear look at it in the dark. They put out a bulletin, searched the surrounding roads, checked traffic cameras at the interstate exits. But the truck had vanished like it had never existed. A detective called me 2 weeks later and told me they had found 3 other reports from women who described similar incidents on that same stretch of I-40 over the past year. Same tactics, high beams, tailgating, trying to force them off the road. None of them got a plate either. None of them could identify the driver. He was still out there, the detective said, and all they could do was increase patrols and hope someone eventually got lucky enough to catch him in the act. That word stuck with me. Lucky. Like surviving was just a matter of chance. I still drive to Knoxville to see Candace, but I never take that route anymore. I add an extra hour to my trip by going through Chattanooga instead, and I always leave in the morning when the sun is high and the roads are full of other cars. Sometimes at night, when I am driving home from work and headlights appear in my rearview mirror, I feel my chest tighten and my grip on the wheel go white. It only lasts a second before I remind myself that I am safe, that I am in the city, that not every set of headlights belongs to him, but some part of me knows that I will never fully stop checking my mirrors. Some part of me is still on that dark road in Tennessee, still running, still waiting for the moment when those high beams reappear and the hunt begins again. I think about the other women sometimes, the ones who reported similar encounters, and I wonder how many more there are who never said anything at all. I wonder if any of them were not as fortunate as me. And I wonder, every single time I get behind the wheel after dark, if tonight is the night he finds someone else. Irrigation equipment sales might sound boring, but the job takes you places most people never see. My territory covers the rural stretches of Missouri, Arkansas, and parts of Oklahoma. Farming country where the nearest Walmart can be 40 miles away, and cell towers are more of a suggestion than a guarantee. I graduated from a small college in Kansas back in 2015, and 8 years later, I had worked my way up to regional accounts manager, which really just meant I spent more time on the road than at home. That particular Wednesday in late March 2023, I had finished my last meeting of the week in a town called Pocahontas, Arkansas, a sleepy little place with one stoplight and a diner that served the best chicken fried steak I have ever tasted. My GPS showed 2 routes back to my motel in Jonesboro, the main highway, which would take an hour and 40 minutes, or a series of county roads cutting through farming corridors that promised to shave off almost 40 minutes. I was tired. My back ached from 3 nights on cheap motel mattresses, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a cold beer. The shortcut seemed like the obvious choice. I pointed my rental car, a white Chevy Malibu that smelled like someone had chain-smoked in it for a decade, toward the setting sun, and headed into the emptiest stretch of land I had seen in years. The first half hour was peaceful in a way that city people never really understand. Fields rolled out in every direction, brown and gray with early spring stubble, waiting for the planting season to bring them back to life. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass without one of them drifting onto the gravel shoulder, and the asphalt was cracked and patched in a dozen places. I passed maybe 3 farmhouses total, all of them set far back from the road with long dirt driveways and rusted mailboxes leaning at odd angles. No other vehicles, not a single one. The sun kept dropping, turning the sky into bands of orange and purple, and I cracked my window to let in some of the cool evening air because the heater in the Malibu was broken on full blast. My phone had lost signal about 15 minutes after I left Pocahontas, and the radio was nothing but static. So I drove in silence. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crow lifting off from a fence post as I passed. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, how far removed from anything resembling civilization. At the time, it seemed almost meditative, calming. I had no idea that someone was watching me drive deeper into that emptiness, counting the minutes until I reached their trap. I saw the first branch about 40 minutes into the drive. It was a thick limb, maybe 8 inches in diameter and about 12 feet long, lying diagonally across the road. The bark was still pale where it had broken from the tree, and a few green buds clung to the smaller twigs. It looked fresh, like it had fallen within the last day or 2. We had gotten some strong winds earlier that week, so it did not strike me as unusual. I slowed the Malibu to a crawl and studied the obstacle. There was just enough room on the right shoulder, where the asphalt gave way to packed dirt and gravel, to squeeze around it without going into the shallow drainage ditch beyond. I eased the car over, felt the tires crunch on loose stones, and passed the branch without any trouble. As I pulled back onto the road and accelerated, I glanced in my rearview mirror almost out of habit. The branch sat there in the fading light, a dark shape against the gray pavement getting smaller as I drove away. I thought about stopping to move it out of the road. Some farmer with a trailer might not see it in time, but I was tired, and the daylight was fading fast. I told myself someone local would deal with it. I kept driving. That decision, that small act of laziness, might be the only reason I am still alive to write this. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes passed. I had just crested a small rise in the road, one of the few elevation changes in that pancake flat landscape, when something made me look in the rearview mirror again. I cannot explain why. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. But I looked, and what I saw turned my entire body cold. 2 figures stood in the road behind me, right where the branch had been. They were maybe 300 yards back, but I could see them clearly enough in the last light of the sunset. 2 men, both wearing dark clothing, and they were dragging something across the asphalt. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, and then it clicked. They were pulling the branch back into place, not to the side of the road, across it, blocking it completely. I watched them position it, watched them step back to examine their work, and then both of them turned and looked in my direction. I do not know if they could see me watching them in my mirror, but it felt like they could. It felt like they knew exactly where I was and exactly what I was doing. My foot pressed down on the gas pedal without any conscious decision from my brain, and the Malibu surged forward. The speedometer climbed from 40 to 50 to 60. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find a main road, another car, a farmhouse with lights on. Anything. The GPS on my phone was useless without signal, but before I had lost connection, it had shown this road continuing straight for another 6 or 7 miles before intersecting with a larger county route. 6 miles. At 60 miles per hour, that was 6 minutes. I could do 6 minutes. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, scanning for any sign of civilization, any indication that I was getting closer to safety. The fields blurred past on either side, darker now as the sun slipped below the horizon, and the Malibu's headlights clicked on automatically, cutting 2 pale beams through the gathering dusk. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was empty, just fading gray asphalt disappearing into shadow. The 2 men were gone, or at least too far back to see. For about 90 seconds, I let myself believe that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just local guys clearing debris from the road. Maybe they had put the branch back to mark a hazard until they could return with a chainsaw. My brain scrambled for any explanation that did not involve what my gut already knew was true. And then I came around a gentle curve and saw it, and every desperate rationalization died in my throat. Another branch. No, not a branch. A tree. An entire oak tree, not huge but substantial, maybe 30 feet long, with a trunk as thick as a telephone pole, lying directly across the road. Both ends stretched into the drainage ditches on either side, leaving no gap, no shoulder to squeeze through. Nothing. I slammed on the brakes and the Malibu skidded, the tires screaming against the asphalt, and I came to a stop maybe 20 feet from the barrier. My headlights illuminated the trunk in a harsh detail, the raw, pale wood where it had been cut, not broken, cut with a chainsaw, the teeth marks still visible in the flesh of the tree. This was not storm damage. This was not an accident. Someone had felled this tree and dragged it into the road, positioned it carefully to make sure no vehicle could pass. I sat there, engine idling, staring at that barricade, and my mind raced through options that all led nowhere. I could not drive around it. I could not drive through it, and I could not go back, because somewhere behind me 2 men had sealed the road and were probably already walking in my direction. I was boxed in, trapped on a strip of crumbling asphalt in the middle of nowhere, with night falling fast and no way to call for help. That is when they appeared. Not from behind me, where I expected them, but from the sides. From the tree lines that bordered the fields on either side of the road, maybe 50 yards back from the asphalt. First one silhouette on the left, stepping out from between 2 gnarled oaks, then another on the right, emerging from a cluster of brush. Then 2 more, one on each side, spaced apart like they had rehearsed this. I counted 5 in total before I stopped counting, because my brain was no longer processing information in any useful way. They walked slowly, deliberately, not running, not shouting, just moving toward the road with the calm patience of people who knew their prey had nowhere to go. The last of the daylight was almost gone, but I could make out enough details to know these were not teenagers playing a prank. They were grown men, most of them heavy-set, wearing work clothes, canvas jackets, boots, jeans stained with dirt or oil, and they were carrying things, long things. One of them had what looked like a pipe or a metal rod. Another held something with a wooden handle, an axe or a sledgehammer, I could not tell. A third had a length of chain wrapped around his fist, the excess dangling at his side. These were not tools for clearing brush. These were weapons. And they were walking toward me like they had all the time in the world. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the road. My mind finally kicked into gear, running through every possible option at a speed that felt almost detached from my body. I could get out and run into the fields, but they knew this land, and I did not. And I would be running blind in the dark while they closed in from multiple directions. I could stay in the car and lock the doors, but a sledgehammer or an axe would go through a window in seconds, and then I would be trapped in a metal box with no way to defend myself. I could try to ram the tree blocking the road, but it was solid oak and the Malibu was a mid-sized sedan. At best, I would destroy the front end of the car and disable my only means of escape. None of the options were good. All of them ended with me dead or worse on this empty stretch of road where no one would find me for days. But then I looked at the tree again, really looked at it, and I noticed something. The trunk was thick, yes, but the branches extending from it were not. On the far right side, where the tree's crown had fallen into the ditch, the limbs were thinner, some of them no thicker than my arm. And beyond them, on the other side of the ditch, was an open field. Flat, bare, recently plowed. If I could get enough speed, if I could hit that section at the right angle, maybe, just maybe, I could smash through the smaller branches and make it into that field. I did not give myself time to second guess. The men were maybe 40 yards away now, close enough that I could hear one of them shout something to the others. A harsh, guttural sound that I could not make out, but that sounded like a command. I threw the Malibu into reverse and floored the accelerator. The tires spun, caught, and the car lurched backward. I covered maybe 50 feet before I slammed the brakes, yanked the wheel hard to the right, and shifted into drive. The engine roared as I pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The speedometer climbed, 20, 30, 40, and I aimed the car at the far right edge of the fallen tree, where the branches were thinnest, where the ditch was shallowest, where I had the best chance of breaking through. The headlights bounced wildly as the car hit the gravel shoulder, then the slope of the ditch, and for a terrible second the whole vehicle tilted like it might roll. But the wheels found traction in the soft earth, and the Malibu plowed forward, smashing into the tangle of branches with a sound like 100 bones snapping at once. Wood exploded across the hood and windshield. Something cracked against the side mirror and tore it clean off. I felt the car buck and shudder as it climbed over debris, felt the undercarriage scrape against something solid, and then, impossibly, miraculously, I was through. The field opened up in front of me, dark and endless under the first stars of the evening. The ground was soft from recent plowing, and the Malibu's tires sank a few inches into the loose soil, but the car kept moving. I did not slow down. I did not look back. I just drove, bouncing across the furrows at 30 miles an hour, the steering wheel jerking in my grip as I fought to keep the car pointed in a straight line. Behind me, I could hear shouting, angry, frustrated voices carrying across the empty field, but they were getting fainter with every second. No headlights followed me, no engines roared to life. They had not expected me to do this. They had planned for someone who would stop, who would panic, who would make the mistake of getting out of the car or trying to reason with them. They had not planned for someone desperate enough to destroy a rental car to escape. I drove for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes, crossing field after field, crashing through a low barbed wire fence at one point, until finally, I saw lights in the distance. A farmhouse. A real one, with a porch light on and trucks in the driveway. I aimed the battered Malibu toward it and did not stop until I was parked right in front of the steps, laying on the horn with everything I had. An older man came out first, maybe 60 years old, wearing suspenders over a flannel shirt and holding a shotgun like he knew how to use it. His wife appeared behind him a moment later, already on a cordless phone. I must have looked insane. A stranger in a destroyed car, covered in sweat, babbling about men with weapons and trees across the road. But something in my face or my voice must have convinced them, because the man kept his gun ready while his wife called the county sheriff. I sat on their porch steps, shaking so hard I could barely hold the glass of water they gave me, and waited for the sirens. It took almost 40 minutes for the deputies to arrive, and another hour for them to check out the road I had described. When they came back, their faces told me everything I needed to know before they said a word. The tree was gone. The branch was gone. There was no sign that anything had blocked that road at all. Just some tire tracks in the dirt shoulder and a few broken twigs scattered across the asphalt. No men, no weapons, no evidence that any of it had happened. One of the deputies, a younger guy with a buzz cut and skeptical eyes, asked me 3 times if I had been drinking. I had not. I had not taken any drugs. I was not hallucinating, but I could see in their faces that they did not believe me. They took my statement, gave me a ride back to my motel in Jonesboro, and told me to call if I remembered anything else. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my motel room with the chain on the door and a chair wedged under the handle, staring at the ceiling and replaying every second of what had happened. The next morning, I returned the destroyed Malibu to the rental company and paid the damage fees without complaint. It was worth every penny. I called my boss and told him I was taking a few personal days. Then I drove home to Kansas, taking only major highways the entire way, and I did not stop for anything except gas at well-lit stations with plenty of other cars around. In the weeks that followed, I did some research. I found a few scattered reports online, Reddit threads, local news archives, true crime forums, about similar incidents in rural areas across the South and Midwest. Fake accidents, staged breakdowns, trees or debris blocking isolated roads. Most of the stories ended with the victim escaping, like me, but a few ended with people simply disappearing. Cars found abandoned, missing persons reports that went nowhere. The common thread in all of them was isolation. These people, whoever they were, targeted travelers on back roads, people who would not be missed right away, people whose disappearance could be written off as an accident or a runaway. I never found out who the men on that road were. I never found out what they wanted from me, and part of me hopes I never do. Arizona heat has a way of clinging to your skin even after the sun disappears, and that September night in 2022 was no exception. My name is Carolyn, and I had just turned 34 2 weeks before accepting a job offer that would change everything. Phoenix seemed like the fresh start I needed after spending my entire adult life in El Paso. Same apartment, same dead-end office job, same faces at the grocery store who still remembered me as the quiet girl from high school. A friend from college had connected me with a position at a marketing firm downtown, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. So I packed everything I owned into my old Subaru Outback and decided to drive through the night, because sleeping in motels alone made me more anxious than exhaustion ever could. The plan was simple: 8 hours on the road, arrive by sunrise, begin a new chapter. I had made this drive once before during daylight, and it felt manageable enough. What I did not account for was how different the desert becomes when darkness swallows every familiar landmark, and the highway stretches into an endless black ribbon ahead. By midnight, I had passed Tucson, and was somewhere between Picacho and Casa Grande, though the specifics blurred together after hours of nothing but headlights, cutting through emptiness. The radio had given up on me about 40 miles back, cycling through static and fragments of Spanish stations that faded in and out like whispers. I remember glancing at my phone, no signal, not even a single bar, and thinking how isolated this stretch of road truly was. There were no streetlights out here, no billboards, no signs of civilization beyond the occasional reflective mile marker that flashed green in my headlights. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and I was running on adrenaline and the promise of a bed waiting for me in Phoenix. That was when I noticed the temperature gauge on my dashboard creeping upward, the little needle inching toward the red zone with a slowness that felt almost deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a sensor glitch from the old car acting up, but deep down I knew that needle had never lied to me before. Within minutes, the needle was buried in the red, and a thin wisp of steam began curling up from beneath the hood. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and started looking for somewhere to pull over. But there was nothing, just flat desert on both sides, scrub brush and darkness stretching toward mountains I could not see. The steam grew thicker, flooding across the windshield until I could barely make out the road in front of me. I had no choice. I eased onto the narrow shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires as the car rolled to a stop. When I turned off the engine, the silence hit me like a wall. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the ticking of hot metal and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to process how completely alone I was. My phone was useless. The nearest town was at least 30 miles in either direction, and I knew absolutely nothing about car engines beyond where to put the gas. I popped the hood release but stayed inside, remembering something my father told me years ago about letting an overheated engine cool down before touching anything. The dashboard clock read 12:47. I figured I would give it 20 minutes, maybe 30, and then check the coolant reservoir and hope for the best. Outside my windows, there was nothing but black, the kind of darkness that city people never truly experience, where the sky and the land merge into one indistinguishable void. I leaned my head back against the seat and tried to steady my breathing, telling myself this was just a minor inconvenience, that cars overheat all the time, and I would be back on the road soon enough. That was when I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror, small at first, growing larger as a vehicle approached from the direction I had come. Relief washed through me for exactly 3 seconds before the headlights went dark. The vehicle was still coming. I could hear the engine now, a low rumble growing closer, but whoever was driving had turned off their lights completely. My first instinct was to start my car and drive, overheated engine or not, but my hands would not cooperate. I watched in the side mirror as the shape materialized out of the darkness. An old pickup truck, maybe from the 80s, with a dull paint job that seemed to absorb what little moonlight there was. It pulled up about 20 feet behind me and stopped. The engine cut off. For a long moment, nothing happened, and I sat there barely breathing, telling myself it was probably just someone checking if I needed help. A good Samaritan who turned off his lights because why? I could not think of a single reasonable explanation. Then the driver door opened with a metallic creak that echoed across the empty desert, and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, wearing dark jeans and a work jacket despite the lingering heat. I could not see his face clearly, just the outline of him standing there, watching my car. His hands hung at his sides but slightly behind his hips, like he was holding something or hiding something. I could not tell which. He started walking toward me with slow, deliberate steps, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something. I hit the lock button, even though I was almost certain the doors were already locked, and the click seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The man stopped about 5 feet from my window. He tilted his head to one side, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost friendly, like we were neighbors chatting over a fence. "Carolyn," he said. Just my name. Nothing else. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had not told anyone my name on this trip. I had not stopped anywhere except a gas station outside of Tucson where I paid at the pump and never spoke to a soul. My luggage was in the trunk, out of sight, with no visible tags. There was no possible way this stranger on a pitch-black road in the middle of nowhere could know my name, and yet he had said it like he had known me my whole life. I did not respond. I could not. My throat had closed up, and my mind was racing through every true crime podcast I had ever listened to, every news story about women who vanished on empty highways and were found weeks later in shallow graves. The man took another step closer and leaned down slightly, bringing his face near the window. In the faint glow of my dashboard lights, I could finally see him, weathered skin, maybe mid-50s, with deep-set eyes that caught the light in a way that made them look almost colorless. He had a scar running from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, old and faded, and his lips were cracked from the dry desert air. "Engine trouble," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I can get it going again for you. Just pop the hood and step out for a minute." His voice remained pleasant, conversational, as if he were offering to help a friend change a flat tire. But his eyes never blinked, not once, and they stayed fixed on my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I shook my head, and finally found my voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "I already called for help," I lied. "Someone is on their way." The man smiled at that, a slow spreading of his lips that revealed teeth too white for his worn face. "No signal out here," he said, tapping his own chest pocket where presumably a phone sat. "Checked myself about 10 miles back. Nothing until you hit Casa Grande." He knew. He knew I was lying, and he knew I was trapped, and the way he said it, matter of fact, almost gentle, was worse than if he had screamed at me. I gripped my phone anyway, holding it up as if it were some kind of shield, and he just watched me with that patient expression. Then he began circling my car, moving around the front toward the passenger side with those same unhurried steps. I heard his fingers drag along the hood as he walked, a soft scraping sound that seemed impossibly loud. When he reached the passenger window, he stopped and tapped on the glass 3 times with his knuckle. Tap, 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 like a polite visitor waiting to be let in. "Carolyn," he said again through the glass, "you should not be out here alone. Bad things happen to women on roads like this." I wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear me. I wanted to drive, but my engine was dead. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed, as this man who somehow knew my name continued his slow orbit around my vehicle. He moved to the back now, and I twisted in my seat to keep him in sight, watching as he paused by the trunk and ran his hand along the metal like he was petting an animal. "Nice car," he called out, his voice slightly muffled. "Subaru, reliable, except when they overheat, of course." He laughed softly at his own observation, and the sound of it made something twist in my stomach. I thought about the pepper spray buried somewhere in my purse on the passenger seat, but the idea of taking my eyes off him long enough to dig for it seemed impossible. He completed his circle and returned to my driver's side door, standing so close now that I could see the stitching on his jacket. Without warning, he grabbed the door handle and yanked, hard. The whole car shook, but the lock held, and I heard myself let out a small cry that sounded pathetic even to my own ears. He did not seem frustrated by the locked door. If anything, he seemed amused. He leaned in close then, pressing his face near the narrow gap at the top of the window frame, where the seal had worn away over the years. His breath fogged against the glass, and I could smell him. Cigarettes, motor oil, something sour underneath. "I knew you would break down here eventually," he whispered through that tiny crack, and his voice was so close it felt like he was inside the car with me. "Been waiting a long time for this stretch. Knew you would come through." My mind struggled to make sense of his words. Waiting? How could he have been waiting for me specifically? I had only decided to take this route 3 days ago. I had not told anyone except my friend in Phoenix, and even then only through a text message. The impossibility of it crashed against my terror, and for one wild moment I wondered if I was dreaming, if I had fallen asleep at the wheel and this was some kind of nightmare my exhausted brain had conjured. But the smell of him was too real, the sound of his breathing too close, and when he tapped on the glass again I flinched so hard I bit my tongue. That was when I saw them, headlights in the distance, coming from the direction of Phoenix. 2 bright points of light growing steadily larger on the dark highway. The man saw them too. He straightened up slowly and turned to look, his body going rigid as he calculated something in his head. For a moment he just stood there, silhouetted against the approaching glow, and I held my breath waiting to see what he would do. The headlights kept coming closer now, close enough that I could hear the faint hum of another engine cutting through the desert silence. The man looked back at me one last time, and in the growing light I saw his face clearly for the first time. Those pale eyes, that scar, an expression that was not anger or frustration, but something closer to disappointment, like a child whose game had been interrupted. "Another time, Carolyn," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked back to his truck with the same unhurried pace he had used before, as if he had all the time in the world. He climbed inside, started the engine, and pulled away without turning on his headlights, disappearing into the darkness ahead like he had never been there at all. The other car, a minivan with a family of 4 heading home from a camping trip, stopped when they saw me on the shoulder with my hood up. A man named Douglas and his wife Renee helped me add coolant from a jug they kept for emergencies, and their 2 kids watched from the back seat with sleepy curiosity. I must have looked like a wreck because Renee kept asking if I was okay, if something had happened, and I did not know how to explain that a stranger had just circled my car calling me by a name he should never have known. They followed me all the way to Casa Grande and waited while I pulled into a gas station with bright lights and security cameras and people. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, shaking, calling my friend in Phoenix and then the police. The officers who came took my statement but seemed skeptical. No crime had technically been committed, they said, and without a license plate or better description, there was not much they could do. I never made it to Phoenix that night. I got a motel room in Casa Grande and lay awake until sunrise, watching the door and jumping at every sound in the hallway. It took me 3 weeks to figure out how he knew my name, and the answer made everything worse. I had stopped at that same gas station outside Tucson dozens of times over the years during visits to Phoenix, always paying at the pump, always thinking I was anonymous. But there was a rewards card linked to my credit card, one I had signed up for years ago and forgotten about, and every transaction printed my full name on their system. A friend who worked in retail told me that anyone with access to the register could see customer names attached to pump purchases. I do not know if that man worked there, or knew someone who did, or had some other way of tracking vehicles that passed through. I do not know how he knew my car would overheat on that specific stretch of road. Maybe he had followed me before and noticed the steam. Maybe he had even done something to cause it during one of my earlier stops. The possibilities spiraled in my head for months until I had to force myself to stop thinking about it or go insane. I live in Phoenix now, and I have not driven through that stretch of desert since that night. When I visit family in Texas, I fly. I traded in the Subaru for a newer car with better locks and a built-in GPS tracker that my brother can monitor from his phone. I changed my name on every rewards card, every account, everything that might print my information on a receipt somewhere. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about what would have happened if that minivan had not appeared when it did. If Douglas and Renee and their 2 sleepy kids had decided to take a different route home. The man said, "Another time," like it was a promise, and for a long while I expected him to keep it. But 3 years have passed, and I have never seen that old pickup truck again. Never heard that calm voice say my name through a car window. Maybe he found someone else. Maybe he is still out there on some dark road, waiting for another woman to break down in exactly the right spot. I try not to think about it too much, but I always check my rearview mirror now, and I never let my gas tank drop below half, and I will never again drive alone through the desert at night. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Everyone in my family graduated high school in 2008, cousins and all, which puts us right around 34 now. I mention that because when you hit your mid-30s, you start thinking you have life figured out. You have seen enough, experienced enough, and nothing really surprises you anymore. That confidence disappears real fast when you find yourself on a dark highway in rural New Mexico with a stranger pretending to be a cop standing at your window. I had been driving home from a work conference in Albuquerque, heading back to my apartment in Denver. The smart thing would have been to stay overnight and leave in the morning, but my cat needed her medication, and I had nobody to check on her. So there I was, somewhere past 2 in the morning, surrounded by nothing but flat, empty desert and the occasional cactus shadow in my headlights. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon into nowhere, and I had not seen another car for at least 40 minutes. I was listening to some old country station, the kind that plays classics from the 70s and 80s, trying to keep myself awake with bad singing and strong gas station coffee. The speed limit was 75, and I had been doing maybe 78, nothing crazy. That is when I noticed headlights appear in my rearview mirror, coming up fast. I figured it was just someone in a hurry, maybe a trucker running late on a delivery, so I moved slightly to the right to give them room to pass. But they did not pass. The car slowed down and settled right behind me, close enough that I could tell it was some kind of sedan, gray or silver, hard to tell in the dark. Then a single blue light started flashing on their dashboard. Not a light bar on top like normal police cruisers have, just one of those magnetic dash lights you see in unmarked vehicles sometimes. My first instinct was to pull over immediately because that is what you do when you see blue lights. But something in my gut made me hesitate, made me grip the steering wheel tighter and glance at my phone sitting in the cup holder. I remember my dad telling me once that if you ever get pulled over in an isolated area and something seems wrong, you have the right to drive slowly to a well-lit public place before stopping. He was a long-haul trucker for 23 years and had seen all kinds of things on the road. So I slowed down to about 50, turned on my hazard lights to signal that I acknowledged the car behind me, and kept driving. I was hoping to see a gas station, a rest stop, anything with lights and maybe another human being. But the road ahead was nothing but darkness and the faint silhouette of distant mountains against a slightly lighter sky. The sedan stayed right on my tail, that blue light pulsing steadily. After about 2 miles of this, I heard a short burst from what sounded like a police siren, just a quick yelp, and I knew I could not keep going without making things worse. There was a wide shoulder coming up on the right, gravel and dirt, and I pulled over there with my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sedan pulled up behind me, maybe 15 feet back, and killed the blue light but left the headlights on, pointed directly at my mirrors. I could not see anything behind me except blinding white glare. I rolled my window down about 3 inches, just enough to talk through, and waited. It took him a long time to get out of his car, longer than any traffic stop I had ever experienced. When he finally approached, he came up fast, almost jogging, and stopped right at my window with a heavy flashlight already shining in my face. He was a big guy, over 6 feet, wearing dark pants and a black jacket with no visible patches or markings. His belt had a holster on it, and I could see the grip of a handgun, but nothing else that looked like standard police equipment. No radio, no taser, no body camera. He did not say good evening or ask for my license. The first words out of his mouth were, "You know you were driving real suspicious back there, slowing down like that." I tried to keep my voice steady and told him I was just being cautious because I was not sure if he was a real officer. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. His face changed, got tight around the jaw, and he leaned closer to my window. "You think I'm not real? You think someone would be out here at 2 in the morning pretending to be law enforcement?" He let out this short laugh that had no humor in it at all. I asked him which department he was with, and he ignored the question completely. Instead, he started shining his flashlight around the inside of my car, moving the beam across my back seat, my passenger seat, the floor mats. He lingered on my work bag, a plain black laptop case, and asked what was in it. I told him it was just my computer and some work documents. He made this sound, almost like a grunt, and said he was going to need me to step out of the vehicle for a compliance check. I asked him what a compliance check was, and he just repeated himself, slower this time, like I was stupid. Step out of the vehicle for a vehicle compliance check. Everything in my body was screaming at me to stay in the car. I had never heard of a vehicle compliance check in my life, and I grew up around cops because my uncle spent 30 years with the Denver Police Department. I told the man I would be happy to cooperate, but I wanted to see his badge first. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet, flipped it open for maybe 2 seconds, then snapped it shut. In that brief flash, I saw something that looked like a badge, silver and shaped like a shield. But where the department name should have been, there was nothing but scratched metal, like someone had taken a knife or a key and scraped the letters off deliberately. That image burned into my brain. A badge with no name, no department, no jurisdiction. He tucked the wallet back into his jacket and put his hand on his hip, right next to the holster. Satisfied? Now step out." His voice had dropped lower, and there was something in his eyes that made me think of a dog right before it bites. That flat, focused stare. I told him I was not getting out of my car until he told me what department he was with and what law I had broken. He slammed his palm against my window frame so hard that I flinched back into my seat. "People who drive alone at night usually have something to hide," he said, and his voice had this strange calm to it now, like he had made some kind of decision. "Open your trunk." I said no. I said it clearly and firmly, even though my voice cracked on the word. He walked away from my window then, not back to his car, but around to the rear of mine. I watched him in my side mirror, his silhouette moving through the red glow of my taillights. He tried the trunk handle, found it locked, and I saw him crouch down to look at something near my bumper. My license plate, I realized. He was memorizing my license plate. When he stood back up, he walked slowly along the passenger side of my car, dragging his flashlight across the windows, letting the beam linger inside like he was cataloging everything he saw. He stopped at my passenger door and tried the handle. Locked. I had never been more grateful for the habit of locking all my doors the second I get in the car. He stood there for a moment, just staring at me through the glass, and in the harsh white light of his flashlight I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was maybe in his late 40s, weathered skin, a scar that ran through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. His eyes were pale, gray or light blue, and they had this emptiness to them that scared me more than anything else. Not anger, not frustration, just nothing. Like I was not a person to him, just an obstacle or maybe an opportunity. He tapped on the window with the flashlight 3 slow, deliberate knocks and said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Open the door." I reached for my phone in the cup holder, ready to call 911. And that is when I saw headlights appear on the horizon behind us, coming from the same direction I'd been traveling. The man saw them too. I watched his head turn, watched his whole body stiffen as he tracked those approaching lights. For a few seconds he did not move at all, just stood there calculating something in his head. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked back toward his sedan. Not running, not rushing, just a calm, steady walk like he was finishing up a routine traffic stop. He got into his car, and I expected him to pull out and drive away, but he just sat there with his headlights still pointed at my mirrors. The other car was getting closer now, maybe a quarter-mile out, and I could tell from the height of the headlights that it was some kind of truck or SUV. I did not know if I should stay or go. Part of me wanted to floor it and get as far away as possible, but another part of me thought maybe this other driver could help, could be a witness, could at least confirm that I was not losing my mind. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching the approaching headlights grow brighter. The truck passed us without slowing down. It was a white pickup, older model, and I caught a glimpse of a man in a baseball cap behind the wheel. Did not even glance at us, just kept driving into the night like 2 cars on the shoulder was the most normal thing in the world. But that brief moment, those few seconds when another human being was close enough to see us, was apparently enough. The sedan behind me finally moved. It pulled out onto the highway, no turn signal, no lights at all. He drove away in complete darkness, no headlights, no taillights, nothing. I watched the shape of his car disappear into the black until I could not see it anymore. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. I sat there on that gravel shoulder for at least 10 minutes, just trying to get my hands to stop trembling enough to drive. When I finally pulled back onto the highway, I did 90 the rest of the way to the Colorado border and did not stop until I saw the lights of a 24-hour gas station outside Trinidad. I filed a report with the New Mexico State Police the next morning. The officer who took my call was polite but not surprised, and that scared me almost as much as the encounter itself. He told me there had been multiple reports over the past 18 months of someone conducting fake traffic stops on rural highways in the northeastern part of the state. Same description every time: gray or silver sedan, single blue dash light, a large man in plain dark clothes who refused to identify his department. Nobody had ever gotten a clear look at the license plate because he always positioned his headlights to blind the driver. Nobody had ever been able to identify the vehicle make or model with certainty. The officer asked me if the man had tried to get me out of my car, and when I said yes, there was this long pause on the line. He told me I did the right thing by staying inside and keeping my doors locked. He said not everyone had been that lucky, but he would not elaborate on what that meant. I did not push him. Part of me did not want to know. I still think about that night more often than I would like to admit. Sometimes when I am driving after dark, even on busy highways with plenty of traffic, I catch myself checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, watching for a single blue light. I never drive through New Mexico at night anymore. I take different routes now, even if they add hours to my trip, even if it means stopping overnight somewhere and paying for a motel. My uncle, the one who was a cop in Denver, told me that impersonating a police officer is a felony in every state. But these guys are almost impossible to catch because they operate in isolated areas with no witnesses and no cameras. He said some of them are thieves looking for easy targets and some of them are something worse. He did not say what worse meant, and I did not ask. All I know is that somewhere out there, on some dark stretch of highway in the desert, that man is still pulling people over. And not everyone is going to be lucky enough to have another car show up at just the right moment. I got away. I have no idea how many others did not, and that thought keeps me awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, remembering those pale, empty eyes watching me through the glass. Anyone who has driven through rural Oregon knows how fast civilization disappears once you leave the main highways. A college friend of mine had gotten married that weekend at a vineyard outside Bend, and I had made the 3-hour drive from Portland to celebrate with her. By the time the reception wound down and I said my goodbyes, the sun was already sinking behind the Cascade Range, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. I had graduated from Portland State back in 2012, spent over a decade building a career in healthcare administration, and thought I knew these roads well enough to take a shortcut. My GPS showed a 40-minute detour due to construction on the main route, but there was an alternative, a narrow county road that would shave off almost half that time. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked on the map, just a thin gray line winding through national forest land. That decision, made in the fading light of a Sunday evening, nearly cost me everything. The first few miles were unremarkable. Dense stands of Douglas fir pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked what little daylight remained. I passed a single farmhouse about 2 miles in, its windows glowing warm yellow, and then nothing, just endless forest in the growing darkness. My phone lost signal almost immediately, which I expected out here, so I had downloaded the route beforehand. The road began to climb and twist, each curve revealing more of the same empty wilderness. I had the radio on low, some public station playing jazz, and I remember feeling almost hypnotized by the rhythm of the turns. Left, right, left again, the steering wheel moving smoothly through my hands. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the hum of my engine and the occasional flash of reflective markers on the roadside. I checked the clock on my dashboard, 7:47 in the evening. According to my calculations, I had about 12 more miles before this road connected back to the highway. That is when I came around a sharp bend and saw the sedan. It was an older model, maybe a late 90s Buick or something similar, dark green with patches of rust eating through the paint near the wheel wells. The car sat diagonally across both lanes, its front bumper nearly touching the embankment on the left side of the road, its rear blocking the narrow shoulder on the right. Both front doors hung open like broken wings, and the hazard lights blinked in a slow, dying rhythm, that amber pulse barely visible, as if the battery was almost drained. My first thought was accident. Someone had lost control on the curve, maybe hit a deer and needed help. I eased off the gas and let my Subaru roll to a stop about 30 feet behind the sedan. The headlights illuminated the scene in harsh detail. Empty driver's seat, empty passenger seat, a wadded fast food bag on the dashboard. No movement, no one calling for help. just those weak hazard lights blinking against the wall of black forest. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Something about the positioning of the car nagged at me. It was too deliberate, too perfectly placed to block the entire road. A real accident would have left skid marks, broken glass, maybe a dent in the guardrail. But the asphalt was clean, and the sedan looked undamaged except for its age. I was reaching for my phone out of habit, forgetting I had no signal, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. On the right side of the road, maybe 15 feet into the tree line, something shifted in the underbrush. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer or a coyote disturbed by my headlights. But then I saw the glint of metal, a brief flash like light catching a belt buckle or a zipper, and below it, partially hidden behind a thick stump, a pair of boots. Work boots, the kind with steel toes planted firmly on the ground, not moving, just waiting. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe it was just someone who had gone into the woods to relieve themselves after their car broke down. But even as that thought formed, I knew it was wrong. Nobody stands perfectly still behind a tree when a car pulls up. Nobody hides. I shifted my gaze to the left side of the road, scanning the shadows beyond the reach of my headlights. And that is when I saw the second figure. This one was crouched low behind a cluster of ferns, about 20 feet from the sedan, positioned so that anyone who got out to help would have their back to him. He was wearing something dark, a hoodie or a jacket, and I could just make out the shape of his shoulders, the angle of his head as he watched my car. Two men, hiding, waiting on opposite sides of a road that saw maybe 10 cars a day. The sedan was not broken down. The sedan was a trap. Every instinct I had screamed at me to move. I did not think about it consciously. My foot simply lifted off the brake and slammed onto the gas pedal in reverse. The Subaru lurched backward with a jolt that threw me against the steering wheel, and I heard the tires squeal against the pavement as I cranked the wheel hard to keep the car on the road. In my rear-view mirror, I saw only darkness and the faint glow of my taillights reflecting off the trees. I had no idea what was behind me, whether the road curved or dropped off or narrowed further. I was driving blind, backward, at a speed that made no sense for these conditions. And then I heard shouting, male voices, 2 of them, loud and angry. I glanced forward through the windshield just in time to see both figures break from the tree line and sprint toward my car. The one on the right was faster, already closing the distance with long, powerful strides. The one on the left reached into his jacket as he ran and pulled something out, something dark and angular that caught the glow of my headlights for just a fraction of a second. I did not wait to see what it was. I kept my foot on the gas and my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, trying to keep the white line on the edge of the road visible as I flew backward through the darkness. The engine roared in protest at the high RPMs, and the whole car shuddered as I hit a pothole I never saw coming. My head snapped back against the headrest, and for a terrifying moment, I felt the rear wheels slip off the pavement onto the gravel shoulder. I corrected hard, yanking the wheel to the left, and the Subaru fishtailed before finding the road again. Behind me, or ahead of me now, from their perspective, I could still hear the men shouting, their voices growing fainter but not faint enough. I risked another glance forward and saw one of them had stopped running. He stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights, and he was holding something up to his face. A phone. He was taking a picture of my license plate. The other one had not stopped. He was still coming, and he was close, maybe 40 feet away and closing fast. The road curved sharply to the right about 100 yards back. I remembered it from the drive-in, remembered the yellow warning sign with the arrow. If I hit that curve at this speed, going backward, I would go straight off the road and into the ravine. I had maybe seconds to make a decision. I could keep reversing and pray I remembered the curve correctly, or I could try to turn around. There was no room for a 3-point turn, but I had seen truckers do something once on mountain roads, a sort of controlled spin where you use the momentum to whip the car around. I had never tried it. I had no idea if my Subaru could even do it, but the alternative was driving blind into a curve I could not see. with a man sprinting toward my window and another one recording my plate so they could find me later. I made my choice. I jerked the wheel hard to the left and stomped on the brake with one foot while keeping the other on the gas. The car screamed. The tires howled against the asphalt, and for one horrible, endless second, I felt the entire vehicle pivot on its axis like a carnival ride, the world spinning outside my windows in a blur of black trees and white headlight beams. The car came to a stop facing forward. I do not know how. I do not know if it was luck or physics or some deeply buried instinct that made me ease off the brake at exactly the right moment. But suddenly, I was pointed in the right direction, my headlights cutting down the road I had just reversed through, and my foot found the gas pedal before my brain even registered what had happened. The Subaru shot forward with a surge of acceleration that pushed me back into my seat. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the man who had been chasing me. He had stopped in the middle of the road, his silhouette frozen in the red glow of my taillights, watching me escape. The other one, the one with the phone, had disappeared back toward the sedan. I did not slow down. I did not look back again. I just drove, my headlights bouncing off the trees as I pushed the car faster than I should have on that narrow, winding road. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I realized I was making a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream, this high-pitched noise that did not even sound human. The speedometer climbed past 50, then 60, on a road that probably should not have been driven faster than 35. I have no memory of the next several miles. My body drove while my mind tried to catch up with what had just happened. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached for days afterward. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, that copper flavor you get when adrenaline floods your system. I remember flinching at every shadow, every branch that moved in my headlights, convinced that another car would appear around every bend to cut me off. But nothing came. The road stayed empty, and eventually the trees began to thin, and I saw a glow on the horizon that meant civilization. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled into the first gas station I saw, a brightly lit Chevron with a few cars at the pumps, and a teenager in an orange vest collecting shopping carts from a little grocery store next door. I parked crookedly across two spaces, stumbled out of my car, and vomited onto the pavement. The teenager stared at me. A woman filling her tank asked if I was okay. I could not answer. I just stood there, bent over with my hands on my knees, shaking so hard I thought I might collapse. The woman at the pump ended up calling 911 for me. Her name was Jolene, and she stayed with me until the police arrived, holding my arm and telling me to breathe, just breathe. 2 deputies from the county sheriff responded within 15 minutes, and I told them everything. The sedan, the men hiding in the trees, the one who photographed my plate, the object pulled from the jacket. They exchanged a look when I described the location, a look that told me this was not the first time they had heard something like this. One of them, a stocky man with a gray mustache named Deputy Farrell, told me I was lucky. He said there had been 3 similar incidents on rural roads in that area over the past 18 months. Cars blocking the road, people flagging down drivers with fake emergencies. 2 of those drivers had stopped to help. One had been beaten, robbed, and left unconscious in a ditch. The other, a woman traveling alone like me, had never been found. Her car turned up 2 weeks later in a field outside Redmond, stripped for parts, her purse still sitting on the passenger seat. They never caught anyone. No witnesses, no cameras, no evidence except the cars left behind. I filed a report that night and gave them every detail I could remember. The green sedan, the rust spots, the work boots, the dark hoodie, the way one of them ran with long strides like an athlete. Deputy Farrell told me they would send a patrol to check the road, but when they got there an hour later, the sedan was gone. No tire marks, no footprints, nothing to prove that any of it had happened except my word and the scrapes on my rear bumper, where I had clipped something during that desperate reverse. I changed my license plate 2 days later just in case. I installed a dash cam in my car. I stopped taking shortcuts through rural areas even in daylight. For months afterward, I checked my mirrors constantly, convinced I would see that green sedan following me, those 2 figures waiting at the end of my driveway. That feeling has faded now, mostly, but it never fully goes away. Sometimes when I am driving at dusk and the road gets a little too empty, a little too quiet, I remember those boots behind the stump, that flash of metal in the trees, and I press the gas pedal just a little harder. I think about that other woman, the one who was never found, and I wonder what made her stop when I did not. Maybe she was braver than me. Maybe she was just unlucky. Either way, I know exactly how close I came to disappearing on that road, and I will carry that knowledge with me for the rest of my life. "14 hours into what should have been a 12-hour drive, my GPS decided to reroute me through some back roads in rural Georgia. It was a Wednesday in late September 2024, and I had been driving from my apartment in Charlotte to visit my older brother in Savannah for his 40th birthday. At 26, fresh out of a dead-end relationship and grinding through my second year as a paralegal at a small law firm, I figured the solo road trip would clear my head. The highway had been smooth until a major accident near Macon forced everyone onto detours, and somehow I ended up on a 2-lane road cutting through pine forests and farmland I had never seen before. My phone signal had dropped to 1 bar, the sun was sinking fast behind the tree line, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I had not passed another car in almost 20 minutes. The isolation should have bothered me more than it did, but I was too tired to care. Too focused on just getting to my destination before midnight. I felt the steering wheel jerk to the right before I heard the sound, that unmistakable flapping of rubber against pavement that every driver dreads. My front passenger tire had blown, and I pulled onto a narrow shoulder that was barely wide enough for my Ford Escape. When I stepped out to assess the damage, the silence hit me first. No birds, no distant highway noise, nothing but the wind moving through the pines and the ticking of my cooling engine. The tire was completely shredded, and I realized with a sinking feeling that my spare was one of those tiny temporary ones that I had never actually learned to install. I pulled out my phone to call roadside assistance through my insurance, but the signal kept flickering between 1 bar and nothing. I was standing there, trying to hold my phone at different angles like that would somehow help, when I saw headlights appear around the bend behind me. A tow truck, moving slow, its yellow roof lights cutting through the growing dusk like it had been waiting for me. The truck pulled up behind my car and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with a wiry build and arms that seemed too long for his body. He wore a gray work shirt with no visible name patch, and his face was weathered in a way that made it hard to guess his age, anywhere between 40 and 60. His hair was cropped short, almost military style, and he had this way of tilting his head slightly when he looked at me, like a dog trying to figure out a strange noise. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he had rehearsed this exact moment. He asked if I needed help, said he had seen my hazard lights from a mile back. I thanked him but told him I was calling my insurance for roadside assistance. He nodded slowly, then said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. He said all the local shops were closed for the night, and that my best bet was to let him tow me to a private lot about 15 miles down the road where I could wait safely until morning. I told him I appreciated the offer, but that I would rather wait for my insurance company to send someone. He did not move, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, studying me with that tilted head. The smile faded, and he said waiting out here was not a good idea, that this stretch of road got dangerous after dark. I asked him what he meant by dangerous, and he just shrugged and said there had been incidents, people getting hurt, cars getting stolen. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic on his clothes. He said he was just trying to help, that I was a young woman alone on an empty road, and that not everyone out here had good intentions. The way he said it, slow and deliberate, felt less like a warning and more like a threat wrapped in concern. I told him again that I was fine, that help was on the way, even though I still had not been able to get a call through. He stared at me for a long moment, then walked back to his truck and leaned against the driver door, arms crossed, watching. I got back into my car and locked the doors. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I kept glancing at my rearview mirror where I could see his silhouette against the fading sky. I tried my phone again, and this time it connected for just long enough to reach my brother. The call was breaking up badly, but I managed to tell him where I thought I was, somewhere off Route 221, near a town called Pemberton or Pemberton County. I was not sure. He said he would call the sheriff and send help, told me to stay in the car with the doors locked, and then the call dropped. Those few seconds of connection felt like a lifeline being thrown to me across a dark ocean. I sat there gripping my phone, watching the battery drain to 37%, and tried to slow my breathing. The tow truck driver had not moved. He just stood there, a dark shape against his truck, and I could feel his eyes on me even through the growing darkness. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20, and he did not leave. Then he started walking toward my car again. This time his posture was different, less casual, more purposeful, like he had made some kind of decision. He knocked on my window and I cracked it maybe an inch, just enough to hear him. His voice had changed too, lost that fake friendliness from before. He said I was making a mistake, that my phone was not going to work out here, that nobody was coming for me. He said he had been doing this a long time, and he knew how these situations ended. I asked him what exactly he had been doing a long time, and he paused, like he realized he had said too much. He recovered quickly, said he meant towing cars, helping stranded drivers, but there was a flicker in his expression that told me he was lying. I told him to leave me alone or I would call the police. He laughed at that, a dry sound with no humor in it, and said, "Go ahead, try." He pointed out that my phone had no signal, that I was miles from anywhere, and that the nearest police station was in Crawford County, a 40-minute drive even if they left right now. He knew the area too well, recited those details too easily, and that terrified me more than anything else he had said. I decided to do something that felt insane, but also felt like my only option. I rolled up my window, put my car in drive, and started moving forward on the shredded tire. The sound was awful, metal grinding against asphalt, the rims sparking in my side mirror. But I did not care. I would rather destroy my car than stay there with him. He stood in the road for a second and I thought he might try to block me. But then he jogged back to his truck. In my rearview mirror, I saw him climb in and follow me, keeping a steady distance of maybe 50 feet. He did not try to pass me or run me off the road, just followed, his headlights filling my car with harsh white light. I drove like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 miles. My rim throwing sparks, my steering wheel vibrating so hard my arms ached. I kept looking for any sign of civilization, a house, a gas station, another car, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness and that tow truck behind me like a predator trailing wounded prey. Then I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, but the blue and red flash of a police cruiser. I have never felt relief like that in my entire life. This wave of emotion so strong that tears started running down my face before I even realized I was crying. A Crawford County Sheriff's deputy had been dispatched after my brother called, and he'd been driving up and down Route 221 trying to find me. I pulled over and practically fell out of my car, waving my arms, and the deputy got out with his hand on his holster. Behind me, the tow truck had stopped about 100 yards back. For a moment it just sat there, engine running, and I pointed at it, trying to explain through my gasping breaths that the driver had been following me, pressuring me, refusing to leave. The deputy shined his flashlight toward the truck, and I saw something I will never forget. The driver making a slow, deliberate U-turn and driving away. No rush, no panic, just calm and methodical, like this was not the first time he had been interrupted. The deputy, a guy named Weston with a thick Georgia accent and kind eyes, sat me down in his cruiser and let me catch my breath. He handed me a bottle of water and asked me to describe everything that had happened, which I did, stumbling over my words but getting the important parts out. When I mentioned the name on the side of the tow truck, I had noticed it earlier but my brain had been too panicked to process it. he frowned and asked me to repeat it. I told him it said something like reliable roadside or reliable recovery, but now that I thought about it, the lettering had looked wrong, uneven, like it had been applied recently and maybe not professionally. Weston typed something into his computer, waited, then looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. He said there was no registered towing company by that name in Crawford County or any of the surrounding counties. He asked if I had noticed the license plate on the truck, and I had. Georgia plates, I was pretty sure, starting with the letters BKV. He typed that in too, and after a long pause, he told me the plate did not match any registered tow truck in the state database. Weston called for backup and stayed with me while we waited. Another deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, and they arranged for a legitimate tow truck to come get my car from a company in the next town over. While we waited, Weston told me some things that kept me awake for weeks afterward. He said this stretch of Route 221 had been flagged internally for unusual activity over the past 18 months. Cars reported stolen after breakdowns, a couple of drivers who had gone missing for hours before turning up disoriented and unable to explain where they had been. One woman had her car towed to what she was told was a repair shop, but when police investigated, the address did not exist. They found her vehicle 3 weeks later, stripped for parts, in a barn about 60 miles away. No arrests had been made because nobody could identify the people involved. The descriptions were always vague: average height, average build, forgettable face. But the man I had encountered was not forgettable at all, and when I described him in detail, Weston wrote down every word like it might actually help them catch whoever was doing this. My brother drove up from Savannah to meet me at the Crawford County Sheriff's Station, and I have never hugged anyone so hard in my life. He took one look at me. Mascara streaked down my face, still shaking, clutching a styrofoam cup of cold coffee, and did not say a word, just wrapped his arms around me and let me fall apart. The deputies took a formal statement, showed me some photographs of known vehicle theft suspects in the region, but none of them matched the man I had seen. They told me they would be in touch if anything developed, gave me a case number and a victim's advocate card, and sent me on my way. My brother drove us both to Savannah that night in his truck, while my ruined Ford sat in an impound lot waiting to be assessed. I did not sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tow truck's headlights in my rearview mirror, steady and patient, and I heard his voice telling me that nobody was coming. I kept thinking about what would have happened if my brother had not answered his phone, if the deputy had been 5 minutes later, if I had made the mistake of trusting that man and letting him tow my car to whatever private lot he had in mind. It has been 2 months since that night, and I still do not have closure. The sheriff's office contacted me once, about 3 weeks after, to tell me they had identified the tow truck. It had been reported stolen from a legitimate company in Augusta almost a year earlier, repainted and fitted with magnetic panels to change its appearance. The plates were stolen too, from a pickup in Valdosta. They never found the driver. They never identified him from my description, or if they did, they never told me. I traded in what was left of my Ford for something new, something with better roadside assistance coverage, and I downloaded 3 different emergency apps that can send my location even without cell signal. I do not drive alone at night anymore, not on highways, and definitely not on back roads. Sometimes I wonder if he is still out there, cruising those empty stretches of Route 221, waiting for someone else's tire to blow or engine to stall. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder about those other drivers Weston mentioned, the ones who went missing for hours and came back disoriented, unable to remember what happened. I got lucky. I know that now. But I cannot stop thinking about the ones who were not lucky at all, and what exactly that man had planned for me if I had made the mistake of saying yes. A long drive with my friend Mark had seemed like the clean break I needed that year. I'd just left a job that had drained me to the bone, and he was moving across the country for a new position, so I offered to ride along and help with the haul. By the time we reached that rural rest area, the kind of place that felt forgotten by most maps, Our conversations had thinned into tired rambling. The air outside carried this strange stillness, like everything was holding its breath. A single SUV sat a few spaces down, engine humming softly. Inside it, a guy leaned toward the woman in the passenger seat, speaking low, his jaw moving with this sharp precision that felt confrontational even from a distance. The woman didn't react at all. She stared straight ahead, eyes wide, the kind of stiffness that made her look carved out of wax. Mark muttered something about needing to pee before he passed out, so we headed toward the building. The restroom lights flickered with that sickly yellow tint that shows every crack in the tiles. I remember washing my hands and feeling this weird pressure in my chest, a sense that something was happening outside while we weren't looking. When we walked back out, the night felt slightly different, like it had shifted a few degrees somehow. The SUV wasn't where we'd left it. It had rolled forward and angled itself right across the exit lane, like it was waiting for us. The woman inside had turned her head toward us now, and the expression on her face didn't match the stillness from before. It had this frozen, terrified quality, like she wanted to scream but couldn't make a sound. As we approached my car, the guy in the SUV didn't even glance our way. He was talking on speakerphone, his voice suddenly casual, almost cheerful. The words didn't fit the moment. "Yeah, we'll keep things quiet. No one needs to know anything yet." His tone had that unsettling confidence some people get when they believe they're in complete control of a situation. Mark shot me a look, the kind where concern fills in the blanks without either of us needing to say anything. The woman's eyes tracked us, and I swear there was a pleading glint there, something desperate trying to reach out past the glass. I felt my throat tighten because I didn't know whether to help, run, or pretend none of it was happening. We left quickly, driving in silence for a good 30 minutes before either of us could piece together words. The plan had been to push through until dawn, but neither of us had the energy, so we pulled into a roadside motel that looked worn but open, the kind with a buzzing vacancy sign and a parking lot lit by tired floodlights. While Mark checked us in, I glanced around the lot, trying to shake the lingering tension from the rest area. For a moment, it worked, until a familiar shape rolled quietly past the road and into the lot. The same SUV, lights off, slow enough that it barely seemed to move. My chest tightened again, and every instinct screamed that this wasn't coincidence. The vehicle settled near the far corner as if trying not to draw attention, though the darkness surrounding it made the intention obvious. Something was following us, and we still didn't understand why. We got to our room and locked the door immediately, both of us pretending not to be as rattled as we were. The place had that typical roadside layout, two thin rooms sharing one flimsy wall that you could probably punch through if you were angry enough. Mark tried to play it cool, flipping through channels like noise alone could anchor us back to normal. I remember standing near the window, staring at the parking lot through the slit of the curtain. The SUV was still there, engine off, no movement inside. Just a dark outline waiting in the corner like it belonged to the shadows. I kept thinking about the woman's face from earlier, the way her eyes had locked onto mine, wide and silent, begging without a voice. That image clung to me harder than anything the man had said. Sometime after midnight, the tapping started. Soft at first, so quiet I thought it was just the building settling or maybe a tree brushing against the siding. But it came again. 3 light taps, spaced evenly, almost intentional. Mark muted the TV immediately. We both stared at the wall between our room and the next, the one that felt too thin to be a barrier against anything serious. The tapping repeated, a little firmer, like someone testing how much pressure they could use before drawing attention. I whispered Mark's name, but he didn't answer. He just walked toward the wall with that cautious, slow step, like he expected it to move or crack open. Then came a sound that didn't fit tapping at all. A muffled shuffle, something dragging softly against the carpeted floor just on the other side. We didn't want to call the front desk at first. It felt dramatic, like maybe we were overreacting to a long day and too little sleep. But then a new sound cut through any doubt, a low, strained exhale, the kind someone makes when they're forcing themselves to stay quiet. That was enough to send Mark reaching for his phone. While he dialed, I stepped back from the wall, feeling this weird sense that someone was mirroring my movements just inches away. Dispatch said they'd send a patrol, and while Mark explained the situation, I kept watching the window, half expecting to see the SUV pull right up to our door. Instead, the parking lot stayed still, unnervingly still, as if the whole world had paused while something in the next room tried not to be heard. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on our door, but it wasn't law enforcement. It was softer, slower, the same rhythm as the tapping earlier. Mark and I didn't move. We just stared at each other, stuck in that moment where you're afraid even to breathe too loudly. Whoever was outside didn't knock again. Instead, footsteps moved past our door and down the walkway, stopping somewhere near the far end of the building. We heard a door open, just a small creak, and then everything went silent again. A few minutes later, the patrol car finally arrived, lights flashing faintly against our curtains. Relief washed over me, but only for a second because I suddenly realized I had no idea who or what the officers were about to find on the other side of that wall. The officers knocked on the room next to ours, announcing themselves. No answer. They knocked again, louder this time, and the whole mood of the night shifted. You could hear it in the air, the tension, the expectation. One officer tried the handle and the door pushed open without resistance. Mark and I stepped closer, watching from our doorway even though we knew we shouldn't. The room was empty, completely empty. Bed untouched, lights off, no luggage, no signs anyone had settled in at all. What got me wasn't the emptiness. It was the lingering scent of cheap cologne mixed with something metallic, something sharp, like someone had just left in a hurry. The officers exchanged a quick look, the kind that says we're not writing this off as nothing. They did a sweep of the walkway, checking doors and corners, but whoever had been in there, or whatever, was gone without a trace. When they came to talk to us, the desk clerk appeared too, stepping quietly into the hallway. He was an older guy with a nervous habit of rubbing his thumb across the side of his palm. He listened as we explained the SUV, the tapping, everything. The moment Mark described the man at the rest area talking on speakerphone, the clerk's whole posture stiffened. He lowered his voice and said something that made every hair on my body lift. If it's the same man I think it is, he's stayed here before. Never under the same name. Always checks in late, always with a woman, and she never speaks. Not once. His eyes shifted toward the officers like he regretted saying it out loud. The officers didn't dismiss him. They wrote everything down, including the SUV's description, though part of me could tell they already sensed how slippery this situation might be. Eventually, the patrol car left to scan the nearby roads, and the clerk insisted we move to a room near the front desk for the rest of the night. He handed us a new key card with this slow, deliberate caution, like he was afraid the man might appear behind us at any second. Mark grabbed our bags and we followed the clerk down the walkway, glancing over the railing toward the parking lot every few steps. The SUV was gone. No engine hum, no lights, no silhouette lurking in the dark corner where it had been earlier. The space where it sat looked wrong in a way I can't explain, like the asphalt itself felt relieved to be rid of it. We tried to sleep, but every sound, pipes ticking, cars passing on the highway, the thud of someone closing their door, kept pulling us back into that night's dread. I kept imagining that woman, the way she looked at us, like she had one last chance to reach someone before disappearing for good. By morning, the officers still hadn't located the SUV or anything matching the clerk's past encounters. We checked out quickly, thanking the clerk, who just nodded like this sort of thing haunted him more often than he wanted to admit. As we drove away, sunlight cut through the lingering fog, making everything look harmless again. But I couldn't shake the picture in my mind. That woman in the passenger seat, eyes locked onto mine, silently begging for something I couldn't give. Mark and I barely spoke for the next few hours, and when we finally did, neither of us tried to make sense of what happened. Whatever that man was involved in, whoever that woman was, they vanished as quickly as they appeared. The only concrete resolution we ever got was knowing we'd left that motel alive, and that sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural at all. They're just people moving quietly through the cracks of the world, hoping no one notices. Hard to explain my life at the time without sounding scattered, but I'd been doing contract work all over the region in early 2024, driving from one small town to another because it paid better than sticking to one city. That week I was heading north after a job that ran long, running on gas station coffee, and a playlist I'd already heard way too many times. Mid-afternoon, somewhere between towns I'd never heard of, my front right tire started giving this uneven wobble, like the whole wheel was shifting its weight every few seconds. I pulled over, checked it, didn't see anything obvious, but the sound unnerved me enough that I didn't want to risk another 50 miles on it. A weather-faded sign pointed toward a town I swear wasn't on my GPS the day before, so I turned in hoping to find a mechanic. The place barely counted as a town, 3 blocks, maybe 4, with more empty windows than open businesses. The only sign of life was a convenience store with a crooked open sign buzzing in its window. Behind it sat a garage that looked like someone had tried to renovate it 30 years ago and then just stopped. A single metal bay door was half open, and inside stood a tall guy in a stained gray coverall, sleeves tied around his waist. His name patch had peeled away, leaving only the outline. He had coarse salt and pepper hair tied back with a red elastic band, and the kind of stare that never seemed to blink at the right time. When I explained the tire issue, he nodded slowly and said he needed to bring the car into the closed bay for safety, then gave this odd cough laugh as if he'd said something funny only he understood. I tried insisting that I could just wait outside, but he shook his head and pointed me toward a door beside the garage marked "Customers." The latch was removed, just a smooth metal plate where one should have been. He opened it with a key from his pocket and told me it would only take a little while. The room inside felt wrong the moment I stepped in. Not dangerous, just trapped. The windows were boarded from the inside with mismatched planks, some nailed in diagonals like someone was trying to keep things out, or in. The only furniture was a sagging couch and a vending machine stocked with snacks that expired months ago. When he shut the door, I heard the click of a lock even though there was no latch on my side. That was the first moment a faint tremor of worry started crawling up my spine. Minutes dragged into an hour, then 2 with no sound of tools, no voices, no movement from the garage. I tried knocking on the door, then pressing my ear against it, but all I could hear was a low hum from the vending machine and the whistle of wind sneaking through the boards. By the 3rd hour, I couldn't sit still anymore. I started searching the walls and found a small storage door tucked behind the vending machine, the bottom corner warped as if someone had kicked it once and lost. Bracing all my weight, I pushed until the wood groaned and snapped inward. The gap led to a narrow storage corridor, dimly lit by a single bulb dangling from a frayed cord. At the end of it, a doorway opened into the back of the garage, and that's when I saw my car, parked exactly where I'd left it, completely untouched. Next to it were plastic bins stacked in neat columns, each filled with items that didn't belong together. Backpacks, jackets, travel toiletries, even a baby's shoe. All of it arranged like someone was collecting pieces of people who never came back. Up close, the bins were even worse. One was filled with loose chargers and phones with cracked screens, another with random pieces of luggage tags and keychains, and a third had a mix of sunglasses, half-used travel-size shampoo bottles, and a single license plate bent like someone had tried to fold it in half. There were no labels, no attempt to sort by owner, just piles of life fragments stripped of context. I recognized the brand of a travel mug I'd seen in truck stops 100 times, and for a second, I pictured people I didn't know standing at gas stations, holding those same mugs, on trips they probably never finished. The air smelled like old oil and something faintly metallic, like blood that had been cleaned up weeks ago but never fully left. My own car sitting there untouched made everything worse. Whatever this guy was doing, it didn't involve repairs. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my footsteps quiet on the concrete. That dangling bulb above me swayed slightly, even though the air felt still, making the shadows jump across the bins like they were breathing. From somewhere in the garage, beyond my line of sight, I heard a faint scraping sound like metal dragging briefly across the floor and then stopping. Instinct made me reach for my keys, and I realized they weren't in my pocket. They were with the mechanic. My backpack wasn't with me either. I'd left it in the car. That detail hit harder than I expected. I suddenly understood how easy it would be for someone to strip away a person's identity out here. Take their car, their bag, their phone, and they'd become nothing but an entry on a missing persons list months later, if that. The corridor branched to the left, away from the open area, toward what looked like a side door with a small wired glass window. I moved toward it, counting each step just to give my brain something to hold on to. The window had been painted over from the inside, but at the edges the paint had chipped enough for thin streaks of daylight to leak through. I pressed my ear against the metal door and heard distant traffic, the faint roar of cars passing at highway speed. That sound snapped a decision into place. If I could get out that door, I didn't care about the car anymore. I could get help, or at least distance. The knob resisted at first, but when I leaned my shoulder into it, the old metal frame shuddered, and the latch gave just enough that I could slip through into the harsh, late afternoon light. Behind the building, weeds grew up through cracked asphalt, and the back lot stretched out to a scrubby patch of grass that ended near the highway embankment. No other cars were parked back there. No tow trucks. No sign of anyone else. The main road through the town wrapped around the front, but from where I stood, the street felt miles away. My pulse hammered in my ears as I cut through the weeds, ducking low in case the mechanic stepped outside. I didn't run at first. I walked as quickly as I could without drawing attention, trying not to trip over a half-buried muffler or the skeleton of an old tire. When I reached the edge of the embankment and saw the highway below, the sound of rushing cars felt like proof that the world still existed outside this decaying pocket of nowhere. That's when I finally broke into a run, sliding down the dirt slope and stumbling onto the shoulder, sticking my arm out in a desperate attempt to flag someone down. A delivery van was the first vehicle to slow down enough to notice me. The driver, a middle-aged guy with a mesh cap and a sunburned neck, rolled down his window and stared like he was trying to figure out if I was drunk or hurt. I must have looked wild, dust on my clothes, sweat streaking down my face, breathing like I'd sprinted a mile. I told him I needed to get to the next real town, anywhere with a police station. He didn't ask many questions, just jerked his chin toward the passenger seat and said he was heading east. As we pulled away, I glanced back up the embankment, half expecting to see the mechanic standing there watching. Nothing moved. The place looked empty again, like a set someone forgot to tear down after filming. At the police station, the officer on duty listened carefully, but kept giving me this cautious look, like he was trying to sort out whether I was exaggerating or if something genuinely criminal had happened. When I mentioned the bins of other people's belongings, he leaned forward slightly. That was the first sign that he took any of this seriously. He asked for the exact location, but when I tried pulling it up on my phone, the GPS marker bounced around and wouldn't lock onto anything. The officer eventually radioed for someone to check the area while he took my statement, though he warned me that abandoned towns sometimes got used for storage or salvage work. He said it in a way that suggested he didn't fully believe that explanation himself. By nightfall, another officer stepped into the room and quietly told the one interviewing me that the garage was locked up, lights off, and looked recently vacated. No sign of the mechanic, no boarded windows, no bins, nothing resembling what I'd described. They did, however, find fresh tire tracks in the dirt behind the building, leading toward the main road. I asked if they'd found my car, and both officers exchanged a glance that told me something wasn't right. One of them cleared his throat and said a vehicle matching my description had been located, 2 counties away, in an impound lot. No damage reported, no ticket, no note, no explanation for how it got there or who dropped it off. The impound attendant claimed it had been left in the middle of the night without paperwork. When they finally released me the next morning to pick up the car, I went straight to the lot. Seeing it parked neatly between 2 other vehicles made my skin prickle in a way I still can't articulate. Nothing was missing inside, not even the backpack I'd stupidly left behind. The keys were on the front seat, placed perfectly parallel like someone wanted them to be noticed. I asked the attendant if cameras had picked up anything the night before, but he shook his head. System had been down for days due to a power issue. I drove away feeling like I'd slipped out of a situation that was meant to go very differently, though I still don't know what the mechanic wanted or why he collected those items. All I know is that I take any wobble in my tires seriously now, and I never stop in towns that don't appear on the map.
I've always been the kind of person who needs time alone every now and then, you know? I work as a graphic designer, and being stuck in front of a screen all day really drains me. A few months ago, I decided I needed a break. No technology, no city noise, just me and nature. That's when I found the perfect Airbnb, a cabin deep in the woods, completely isolated. The host assured me it was safe, with decent cell service in case of emergencies, and even a fireplace for chilly nights. I couldn't wait to spend a few days there, just listening to the sound of the trees and the wind. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was starting to set, and everything looked exactly like the photos. A rustic, cozy cabin surrounded by dense trees. It was perfect. The first night went by peacefully. I had a simple dinner, sat on the porch with a cup of tea, and listened to the crickets. It was exactly what I needed. But the next morning, as I was having coffee, I noticed something strange out the window. Outside, among the trees, there was a man standing there. He was about 50 yards away, tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring in the direction of the cabin. My first thought was that he was a hunter, or maybe a local passing through. But even as I tried to rationalize it, a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't normal, right? I stood there for a few minutes, watching him, until he suddenly turned and slowly walked into the forest, disappearing among the trees. I tried to brush it off and go about my day, but the image of that man standing there stuck in my mind. Later in the afternoon, I decided to explore the area to distract myself and get a better feel for the place. I brought my phone with me, more for a sense of security than anything else since the signal wasn't great. The forest was dense and eerily quiet, and the trees seemed taller than I remembered from the night before. The further I walked, the stronger the feeling that I was being watched. Sure, it could have been paranoia after what I saw in the morning, but the unease was hard to shake. When I returned to the cabin, the sun was already setting. I locked the door and tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Then, around 8 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. My heart raced. Who would be knocking on the door of an isolated cabin in the middle of the woods? I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was him, the same man. Now I could see more details. His face was thin, almost too pale, and his eyes were deep-set, unblinking. He didn't look aggressive, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way he just stood there, waiting. When I asked who he was, he replied in a calm, low voice, "I'm lost. I need help finding my way." My first instinct was to hesitate. Something about him felt off, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore a plea for help. You always hear stories about not trusting strangers, but in situations like that, the line between caution and humanity gets blurry. I told him I didn't know the area well and suggested he head to the main road. He stood there a moment longer, then finally walked away, disappearing into the trees. I made sure to watch him until he disappeared into the trees before closing all the curtains and double-checking the locks. From that moment on, the cabin didn't feel as welcoming. Every creak of the wood or sound from outside made me jump. I tried distracting myself by watching something on my phone, but the battery soon died, and the sense of isolation only grew stronger. I spent the rest of the night listening to the wind and trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he really was lost, and I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. The next morning, I decided to head out early and walk around the cabin to see if I could spot any footprints or signs that he'd come back. I didn't find anything, which should have been reassuring, but it only made me feel more uneasy. I went back inside and resolved to stay in for the rest of the day, keeping the doors locked. It seemed like a good plan, until dusk. Around 6 p.m., as I was preparing something to eat, I heard footsteps on the porch. This time there was no knock, just the sound of someone moving outside. My chest tightened, and before I could decide what to do, I heard that same voice again. "I'm lost again." It was him. The same calm, deep voice. But this time, it felt closer. Almost intimate, like he knew I was standing there, frozen, listening. I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding my breath, as if that could make me invisible. He didn't knock on the door this time, or ask to come in. He just stayed outside, repeating those same words in a mechanical tone. "I'm lost again." That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The living room curtains were still open. Out of the corner of my eye, I slowly turned toward the window, and there he was, standing on the porch, staring directly at me. His face looked even more off up close, like his features weren't entirely human, but something trying to mimic it. He didn't smile, didn't make any threatening movements. He just stood there, waiting for me to do something. My first instinct was to run to the kitchen and grab the nearest knife. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat on the floor, gripping the knife tightly. The silence outside was worse than the footsteps or his voice. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to peek out the bedroom window, which faced the back of the cabin. He was gone. I thought about running to the car, but the fear that he might be hiding nearby stopped me. I tried calling the Airbnb host's emergency number, but as expected, there was no signal. It was just me and him now, and all I could do was hope he'd leave, or figure out how to escape before things got worse. The night was pure hell. I spent hours sitting on the floor of the bedroom, holding the knife, trying to listen for any sound that might mean he was still there. The silence was so heavy that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion got the better of me, and I must have dozed off. I woke up to a loud thud, like something had fallen. My first thought was that he'd made it inside. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the knife as I stood up. I took a deep breath, telling myself I had to act. I opened the bedroom door slowly, knife in hand, and stepped out. The living room looked exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The front door, which I'd locked, was wide open. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The door wasn't broken, and the locks were still intact. That's when I heard footsteps inside the house, coming from the kitchen. My body froze. The steps were slow, deliberate, as if he knew I was listening. Every instinct told me to run, but I knew if he was already inside, there was nowhere to go. Summoning the last shred of courage I had, I walked to the living room, keeping my eyes on the hallway that led to the kitchen. When I reached the doorway, I saw his silhouette. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at me with that same blank, unsettling expression, as if waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what to do. My survival instincts were screaming at me to run, but fear kept me rooted in place. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stared at me. The silence was so oppressive, it felt like it was crushing the room. That's when I noticed something in his hand, a crumpled piece of paper. Slowly, he raised his arm and dropped it to the floor, as if he wanted me to take it. I don't know where I found the courage, but I took a step forward, still clutching the knife, and picked up the paper. There was something written on it, but the kitchen light was too dim to make it out. When I looked back up, he was gone. I didn't hear footsteps or doors opening. He had just vanished. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my things and ran to the car. The car door was unlocked, something I could have sworn I'd secured before. I jumped in, started the engine, and drove without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station on the main road, just as the sun was rising. It was only then that I finally worked up the nerve to look at the paper. It wasn't writing. It was a drawing, crudely done, like a child's sketch. It showed a cabin surrounded by trees, with a figure standing in the window. It was the same cabin I'd stayed in. But what sent chills down my spine was the faint outline of a second drawing, almost erased, layered over the first. A human figure inside the cabin, holding what looked like a knife. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I never went back to that forest and contacted the Airbnb host to warn them. The host only replied that other guests had mentioned strange occurrences, but that no one had seen the man. I don't know who or what he was or what he wanted, but one thing is certain: that place wasn't normal. If you're ever thinking about renting an isolated cabin to unwind, take my advice. Choose carefully. I'm not usually one to stay in Airbnbs, but that October, I had no choice. I was in Denver for a work conference, and since everything downtown was too expensive, I ended up renting a small house on the outskirts, in a neighborhood that had clearly seen better days. The streets were full of potholes, the houses had rusted fences, and at night, almost no lights were on in the windows. But I tried not to think much of it. The place had good reviews, and the host seemed friendly. When I arrived, the house wasn't anything special, an old structure with peeling paint. But inside, it was clean, and the couch looked comfortable enough to relax on after a long day. That night, I was exhausted. I'd spent the whole day running between meetings and presentations and barely had the energy to eat a sandwich before collapsing into bed. The bed was old, creaking at the slightest movement, but it was enough. I remember glancing at the clock, 10:13 p.m., before turning off the lights and passing out. I thought the neighborhood would be noisy, but everything was eerily quiet. No barking dogs, no cars driving by, not even the faint hum of a TV. It was a heavy silence, almost unsettling, but I didn't dwell on it. All I wanted was a good night's sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. It wasn't a noise that woke me, nor a bad dream. It was something different, like the air around me was heavy, loaded with a tension I couldn't explain. The room was dark, but a faint beam of light from the street filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the furniture just enough. I lay there for a few seconds, completely still, trying to understand why my body felt on high alert. That's when I noticed something that froze me to my core, a figure standing at the foot of the bed. My heart was racing, but I couldn't move. The figure was tall, thin, and completely motionless. I couldn't see its face because the dim light barely outlined its silhouette, but it was definitely a person. My first thought was that maybe I was dreaming, but the chill running down my spine was far too real. There was no sound, no movement, except for my heart pounding uncontrollably. For a moment, I thought about screaming, but something inside me told me that wasn't a good idea. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to figure out a way out of this. My mind was racing, desperately searching for a plan. There were no weapons or objects nearby that I could use to defend myself. I thought about grabbing my phone from the nightstand, but my arm felt paralyzed. The intruder didn't make a sound or move. That was what scared me the most, the complete absence of movement. Finally, I mustered the courage to sit up in bed, moving as slowly as possible to avoid provoking him. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse with fear. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, like a living shadow, staring at me. Then, as if snapped out of a trance, it moved. Not in a normal way. It was slow, almost unnatural, as if it were gliding backward toward the bedroom door. My heart felt like it was about to burst. As soon as it disappeared down the hallway, I jumped out of bed. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my keys, which luckily were still in the pocket of my pants on the floor, and ran for the front door. When I opened it, the cold night air hit my face, and that's when I realized how much I was sweating. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following me. I sprinted to my car parked on the street and got inside so fast that I didn't even notice I was barefoot. Inside the car, trembling and breathing heavily, I tried to calm down. I started the engine and shifted into gear without even thinking about where I was going. My only goal was to get as far away from that house as possible. The street was deserted, and the silence outside made everything even scarier. As I drove, the adrenaline began to wear off, and I started to realize how surreal everything felt. Who was that person? How did they get in? And more importantly, why didn't they attack me? After a few minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store that, thankfully, was still open. I went inside, still shaking, not even sure what I was looking for. The clerk gave me a strange look, probably because I looked like a mess, barefoot, rumpled clothes, and completely out of it. I grabbed a coffee just to have something to hold and sat at a table in the corner of the store, trying to organize my thoughts. That's when another horrifying realization hit me. I hadn't grabbed anything but my keys and the clothes I was wearing. My phone, wallet, backpack, everything was still at the house. Panic set in all over again. I couldn't just leave everything behind, but there was no way I could go back. After almost an hour of trying to gather my courage, I decided to call the Airbnb host. I borrowed the store clerk's phone, explaining the situation in a disjointed, panicked way. He looked at me suspiciously, but let me use it. When the host picked up, her voice was groggy, clearly having been woken up. I tried to explain quickly. "There's someone in the house. They came into the bedroom while I was sleeping." But what she said left me even more disturbed. That's never happened before. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" My frustration grew, but I knew arguing with her wouldn't solve anything. I realized I had no choice but to go back. I couldn't lose my documents, my phone, and all my belongings. I got back in the car and drove toward the house, parking a few meters away to keep a safe distance. The silence on the street felt even heavier than before. When I got out of the car, my bare feet made soft noises against the cold pavement. With my heart pounding, I approached the front door. It was unlocked, just as I had left it. I stepped inside cautiously, turning on the lights as I went. The place seemed empty, but something felt off. My belongings were gone. Every bag, every piece of clothing, even the phone that had been on the nightstand. Everything had vanished, as if I'd never been there. My mind was in shock. None of it made sense. Whoever that intruder was, they hadn't just invaded the place. They'd taken absolutely everything I owned. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, trying to find any clues, but the house felt colder and emptier than before. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. There were scratches on the wall in the hallway near the bedroom. I moved closer, and my stomach churned at the sight of the crude markings, as if they'd been made with nails or something sharp. They looked like symbols, but I couldn't make sense of them. It felt like they were left as some kind of warning. Without thinking much more, I called the host again and told her I wasn't staying another night. She insisted I report the incident to the police, but all I cared about was getting out of there. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked outside a nearby hotel, where I stayed until morning. When I finally called the police the next day, they went to the house but found nothing. Not the symbols, not my belongings. Everything had vanished. To this day, I don't know who that figure was or what they wanted. All I know is that the silence of that night will haunt me forever. I've never been the type to rent cabins or houses to work, but at that time, I had no choice. It was 2021, at the height of remote work, and I desperately needed a place to focus and finish an important project. I live in a noisy city, and with my neighbor renovating the apartment next door, the idea of a secluded cabin seemed perfect. I found an Airbnb that looked ideal, a small wooden house deep in the woods, about 30 miles from the nearest town. The reviews described it as peaceful and perfect for relaxing. Little did I know, what I'd find there would be anything but relaxing. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, just in time to settle in before sunset. The cabin was charming, with a porch surrounded by dense trees and the smell of aged wood that gave it a cozy feeling. The owner had left a note on the kitchen table with basic instructions: how to turn on the heater, where to find the utensils, that sort of thing. The internet was surprisingly good for such an isolated spot, which was essential for me. After unpacking, I took a quick walk around the property. The place felt so quiet that even the sound of leaves rustling in the wind seemed louder than usual. It was only when I returned inside that I noticed something strange. There were small footprints in the dirt near the back door, as if someone had been walking around. At the time, I convinced myself it must have been a small animal, maybe a dog from the nearest neighbor, who, according to the map, lived nearly a mile away. That night, everything seemed calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While making tea in the kitchen, I noticed one of the windows in the living room was slightly open. I found it odd because I was sure I had closed them all when I arrived. Again, I tried not to overthink it. Maybe the wind had forced it open, or maybe I was just tired. I shut the window, locked the front door, and went to bed. I was exhausted, but the complete silence of the place made it hard to sleep. It felt like every little sound, no matter how faint, echoed throughout the house. In the middle of the night, I heard a creak coming from the living room. My heart raced. I stayed frozen for a few minutes, trying to listen for anything else, but the silence returned. I convinced myself it was just the wood expanding in the cold. The next morning, as I drank my coffee, I noticed one of the chairs in the living room wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It was a small armchair, easy to move. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to recall if I had moved it myself and just forgotten. I decided not to dwell on it. My deadline was tight, and I needed to focus. I spent the day on my laptop, but I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was out of place. By late afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Alongside the small footprints I had seen the night before, there were now fresher ones, even closer to the back door. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and went back inside, locking the door carefully this time. That night, the feeling that something was wrong grew even stronger. After dinner, I noticed my water bottle, which I had left on the side table by the couch, was now on the kitchen counter. There was no way I had moved it without realizing it. My heart started racing, but I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I spent the rest of the night working, but every noise from outside, rustling leaves, branches snapping in the distance, made me feel more uneasy. Before going to bed, I double-checked all the locks, making sure no windows or doors were left open. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a muffled sound coming from beneath the floor. It was rhythmic, like something being dragged in the crawl space under the cabin. My whole body froze. For a few minutes, I stayed completely still, holding my breath and listening to that repetitive noise. Finally, I mustered the courage to turn on the bedroom light and grab my phone. I turned on the flashlight and walked to the living room, trying to ignore the fear making my hands tremble. That's when I noticed the small hatch in the kitchen, something I hadn't seen before. It was covered in a layer of dust, but there was a fresh mark, as if it had been moved recently. My heart pounded in my chest. Whatever was down there wasn't still. I thought about calling the cabin's owner, but honestly, I was frozen in fear. Each step toward the hatch felt heavier than the last, and the flashlight in my hand shook uncontrollably. When I finally got close, I crouched down slowly and touched the edge of the hatch. It was slightly loose, like it had been opened recently and not put back properly. I took a deep breath, bracing myself to open it, but the sound from below stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was terrifyingly silent, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat feels deafening. Summoning every ounce of courage I didn't know I had, I pulled the hatch open. Beneath it was a dark, cramped space, illuminated only by the flickering beam of my flashlight. The smell of mildew and dust was overwhelming, but what caught my attention were the items scattered below. There was an old mattress covered by a dirty sheet and several personal belongings. A mug, a pair of worn-out children's sneakers, and a small backpack. My stomach churned at the sight. Someone had clearly been living down there. But the most chilling part was the feeling that I wasn't alone. A cold draft rose from the crawl space, making me step back just as I heard something moving deeper in the shadows. At that point, all I could think about was getting out of there as fast as possible. I slammed the hatch shut and ran to the bedroom to grab my things. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a while to shove my phone into my pocket and open my suitcase. The silence from below was even more terrifying than the noise I had heard earlier, as if whatever was down there was waiting for me to let my guard down. I tried to convince myself it was just some desperate intruder using the space for shelter, but something about the situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. While I was packing in a frenzy, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like light, quick footsteps circling the cabin. I ran to the window to look out, but the darkness was too thick to see anything. I grabbed my car key and walked to the front door, but as I unlocked it, I noticed the latch on the back door had been tampered with. By that point, I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. I just bolted, throwing open the front door and running into the cold night, the crunch of dry leaves beneath my feet as I sprinted toward my car parked out front. I reached the car with my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were trembling so much that it took me a few tries to get the key into the ignition. As soon as the engine started, I turned on the headlights and looked back at the cabin. It seemed quiet, almost harmless, but something in the window reflections made my skin crawl. There was no one visible inside, but the headlights illuminated something near the back door. Fresh footprints in the dirt. Not just the small ones I'd seen before. These were of different sizes, like more than one person had recently been there. I didn't wait to find out. I threw the car into gear and sped away, navigating the winding forest road as fast as I could. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me, even after I left the cabin far behind. I reached a gas station in the nearest town, shaken to the core. While waiting inside the convenience store for someone to call the police, I replayed everything that had happened in my mind. The hatch, the sounds, the belongings down there. Whoever had been there had been living right beneath me. The police arrived about an hour later, but I never learned the outcome of the investigation. The cabin's owner never responded to me, and the Airbnb listing disappeared a few days later.
I've always loved camping. It's the kind of getaway that disconnects you from the chaos of the city, you know? My friend Mike and I always planned little weekend adventures, and back in early June 2022, we decided to explore some trails in Oklahoma. I had just quit a stressful job, and Mike was on an extended break from work, so it seemed like the perfect time to breathe in some fresh air and catch up. The plan was simple: 2 days in the woods, 1 tent, a few beers, and of course, plenty of stories to tell later. We grabbed an old, worn-out map of lesser-known trails, trusting our compass and instincts, which, looking back, may not have been as sharp as we thought. We arrived in the early afternoon. The forest was dense, almost suffocating, with tall trees that seemed to swallow you whole when you looked up. After hours of hiking, we found a spot that looked perfect for setting up camp. It was near a small creek, but what really caught our attention was an old barn, the kind you only see in horror movies or read about in online forums like this one. It sat there, in the middle of nowhere, as if time had forgotten it. The boards were rotting, the paint was peeling, and the windows. They looked like blind eyes staring at us. Mike, as always, thought it was incredible. "Imagine the photos we could take here," he said. I laughed, but there was this strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was like the place didn't want us there. As the sun began to set, we decided to explore the barn. The inside was filled with things that looked like they'd been abandoned for decades. Rusty tools, unmarked wooden crates, and even an old tractor covered in moss that seemed almost alive. Mike pointed out a pile of bones in the corner, probably from some animal. "Think they still use this place for hunting?" he asked. I just shrugged, but the atmosphere was too strange for logic. Even the sound inside the barn was weird, like the old wood-absorbed noise making everything feel muffled. After a while, we headed back to our tent to make something to eat before it got too dark. Still, that uneasy feeling lingered. Night fell fast, and with it came an oppressive silence. No wind, no animal sounds, just the crackling of the fire we built beside the tent. It was odd. On other trails you'd hear crickets or nocturnal birds, but here everything felt unnervingly still. We chatted about random things to distract ourselves, but the mood shifted when we heard footsteps. It was hard to tell how many, but they were coming from the direction of the barn. Mike grabbed the flashlight while I froze, trying to listen more carefully. "Probably a deer or something," he said, but his tone didn't convince even himself. When he pointed the beam of light toward the sound, what we saw wasn't a deer. 3 men emerged from between the trees, illuminated by Mike's flashlight. They were armed, holding rifles like they were second nature. They didn't look like normal hunters. Their clothes were worn and dirty, and one of them wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over half his face. The oldest one spoke first, his voice low and dry. "You're on private property. You shouldn't be here." Mike tried to respond but stammered nervously. I couldn't take my eyes off the rifle he was holding, pointed casually at the ground but ready to be aimed at us in a heartbeat. "We didn't know, sir. We're just camping. We'll leave right now," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's not that simple," another man said, younger, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. He stepped forward and the tension thickened. Mike stepped back, nearly tripping over the collapsed tent. They started circling us like predators while we stood there, frozen. The oldest one knelt down and prodded the fire with the tip of his rifle, extinguishing it with a quick motion. "You thought you could come here, poke around our things, and leave like nothing happened?" His tone grew more menacing with each word, and that's when it hit me. They knew we had gone inside the barn. We didn't think twice. We grabbed our things as fast as we could, stuffing everything into our backpacks without any care. Mike was shaking so much he dropped his canteen, but I whispered for him to leave it. It wasn't worth the risk. The men stood there, watching us, unmoving, as we backed away. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the hurried crunch of our footsteps on dried leaves. When we were far enough that their flashlights disappeared into the trees, Mike finally spoke, almost breathless. "What the hell was that? They didn't seem normal." I nodded, but I didn't want to answer. At that moment, my only concern was getting to the car. The trail that had seemed so straightforward earlier now felt like a labyrinth. The darkness felt heavier, and the trees around us cast twisted shadows under the weak beams of our flashlights. We walked in silence for a while, but then I started to notice something strange. Footsteps. Not ours. It was like someone was following us, keeping a calculated distance. I stopped abruptly, signaling Mike to stay quiet. He noticed it too because his flashlight started shaking in his hand. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, feeling the air grow colder with every passing second. We turned to look, but there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness. Yet the sound persisted, surrounding us, like the forest itself was closing in. We kept walking, picking up the pace, trying to ignore the feeling that someone, or something, was trailing us. Our flashlights lit up something ahead, and for a moment I thought it was a post or some kind of abandoned structure. But it wasn't. It was a large sign, planted firmly in the ground, with faded letters that read, "Private property. No trespassing. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Beneath the sign, scrawled in what looked like red paint or blood, was a handwritten warning. "Do not look back." Mike read it out loud, and as he did, we heard a loud snap from the trees behind us, followed by heavy, quick footsteps. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted, not daring to look back, the sound of whatever was chasing us growing closer. We ran until our legs burned, and the footsteps behind us seemed to grow louder with every stride. My mind was in full panic, but deep down, I knew that if I turned around I might never make it out. Mike stumbled over a root and hit the ground hard. "Get up!" I yelled, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him up with all the strength I had. He was crying, mumbling something about them being close, but I forced him to keep moving. Finally, we saw a light in the distance, faint and flickering, but enough to give us a shred of hope. When we reached the source of the light, we realized it was coming from a small wooden cabin, almost as old as the barn we'd seen earlier. The door was slightly ajar, and inside was a lantern hanging from the ceiling, swaying gently as if someone had just left. "We have to go in," Mike said, desperate. I hesitated but knew we had no choice. We shut the door behind us and turned off the lantern, trying not to make a sound. The cabin was small and nearly empty, with a table covered in knife marks and an old chair in the corner. Outside we heard footsteps circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, praying that whatever was out there would leave. The footsteps were methodical, almost like whoever, or whatever it was, wanted us to know they were there. Mike clung to my arm so tightly I thought he might cut off my circulation. I stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open, but the steps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than before. Then came a soft sound, a slow tapping on the cabin walls, coming from all sides at once. Mike started whispering a prayer, something incoherent, while I tried to think of a way out. That's when I noticed something strange. On the table near the door was an old crank radio, turned on but completely silent. The dim light on the panel flickered, like it was picking up some kind of signal. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the static, low and distorted. "You still have time. Leave now." I froze, unsure if it was a warning or a trap. Before I could react, the cabin door shook violently, as if someone had slammed into it with all their strength. The door looked like it was about to give in, and my whole body went into overdrive. Mike was in the corner, frozen in terror, staring at the door like it was about to explode. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was clearer. "Run out the back, now!" I didn't question it. I grabbed Mike by the arm and we looked for an escape. There was a small window in the back of the cabin, barely big enough for us to squeeze through, but it would have to do. With some effort, we pushed the rotting wood open and climbed out, landing hard on the damp, leaf-covered ground. Without looking back, we started running again. It didn't matter where we were headed. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. The trees seemed to close in tighter, their branches clawing at us as we pushed through. But then, just as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, we stumbled onto a dirt road. Parked on the side was an old pickup truck, and standing next to it was a man in a hunting vest. He looked at us, confused, as we staggered toward him, covered in dirt and scratches. "What happened to you?" he asked, but I couldn't find the words to respond. I just collapsed on the ground, exhausted. As we caught our breath by the road, the man kept watching us, clearly unsettled by our appearance and panic. Mike finally managed to speak. There was someone in the woods. They were chasing us." The man frowned but didn't look surprised. He glanced toward the trees and spat on the ground before saying, "Those woods are trouble. You're lucky you made it out alive." The way he said it wasn't out of curiosity or concern. It was like he knew exactly what we were talking about. Before we could ask more, he pointed to his truck and said, "Get in. I'll take you to the nearest station." The drive was silent. All Mike and I wanted was to get as far away from that forest as possible. When we finally reached the station, we explained everything to the officer who attended us. He listened carefully, but his expression was distant. When we finished, He just shook his head and said, "You're not the first, and I doubt you'll be the last." He went on to explain that the area had a dark history involving violent landowners and disappearances that were never solved. "If I were you," he said, "I'd forget about this place and move on." That's exactly what we tried to do. To this day, whenever I hear footsteps behind me on an empty street or faint laughter in the middle of the night, I feel that same chill I felt in that forest. I never truly understood what happened out there or who those people were, but one thing is certain: I'll never go camping in Oklahoma again. I've always been passionate about solo camping. Maybe it sounds a little strange, but I've always felt like nothing compares to being out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded only by nature and complete silence. Last year, at the end of September, I took some time off work and decided to explore a more isolated part of the forest in Washington state. It was a place I'd never been to before, but a friend of mine, Mike, had recommended it. He described the area as perfect for anyone looking to disconnect from the world. At the time, my life was a mess. A recent breakup, stress at work. I thought a few days away from everything would be exactly what I needed. I arrived there on a cold, cloudy afternoon. The place was exactly as Mike had described: dense, quiet, and almost surreal in its beauty. I found a small clearing near a creek and decided to pitch my tent there. I spent the rest of the day exploring the area, gathering firewood, and getting familiar with the surroundings. Everything seemed peaceful. Until that night. I can't say for sure what woke me up, but I remember feeling a strange chill as soon as I opened my eyes. Outside, the forest was completely dark, and the sound of the creek felt farther away than before. When I finally mustered the courage to grab my flashlight and unzip the tent, I saw something that sent a shiver down my spine. Footprints circling my tent. They weren't mine. Someone had walked around my tent while I was sleeping. I'm not the type to panic easily, but in that moment it felt like my heart was going to leap out of my chest. The footprints were fresh, as if they'd been made just a short while ago, and they looked like they came from heavy boots. Nothing like the ones I was wearing. I took a deep breath and tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a hunter or another camper who'd wandered by without meaning any harm. But why would someone walk in circles around my tent in the middle of the night? It didn't make sense. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, clutching a pocket knife I always bring with me when camping. Every little sound, the rustle of leaves, the babbling creek, felt amplified. Nothing else happened that night, but the idea that I wasn't alone out there wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning I decided to explore the area more carefully. I wanted to understand if those footprints led somewhere specific. Maybe it was just curiosity or a need to feel safe, but I started following the trail. The footprints disappeared near the creek, but as I walked along the bank, something caught my eye. About 20 yards ahead, I saw a man crouching, digging in the ground as if he were burying something. He was wearing a thick hunting jacket and seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. I ducked down immediately, trying not to make any noise. My heart was racing, and every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there, but I couldn't stop watching. He was pushing something large and heavy, wrapped in a black bag, into a hole. I stayed frozen for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to turn and run back to my campsite, but what if he saw me? So I did my best to back away quietly, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. When I thought I was far enough, I ran back to my tent as fast as I could. My mind was a mess. I tried to convince myself it could have been harmless. Maybe he was just burying trash or something he didn't want to carry home. But I couldn't shake the image of how nervous he looked, constantly checking his surroundings. It didn't feel right. I spent the rest of the day near my campsite, too afraid to wander far. I didn't want to risk running into that man again. When night fell, I started to feel even more vulnerable. Every little sound felt like it was coming from something, or someone getting closer. Around midnight, I heard a noise that froze me in place. Footsteps. It wasn't an animal. It was human footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my tent. Each time they came around, the sound grew louder, closer. Suddenly, something hit the side of the tent, like a branch or a rock. I was paralyzed. Whoever it was, they were trying to scare me. After what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped, but I knew someone was still out there. I didn't sleep a second that night. I sat there clutching my knife, ears straining for any sound. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the trees, I packed up everything as quickly as I could. I had to get out of there. As I took down the tent, something on the ground caught my attention. A broken branch, placed right in front of the tent's entrance. It hadn't been there before. It felt deliberate, like a warning. My mind was racing, and as much as I wanted to believe I was imagining things, every detail pointed to the opposite. On the hike back to the main trail, the feeling of being watched never left me. I'd stop occasionally and glance behind me, but there was no one there. Still, the forest felt heavier, darker, like it was closing in around me. That's when I saw him, about 50 yards away between the trees. It was the same man. He was standing there, partially hidden behind a trunk, watching me. He didn't move closer, but the look in his eyes sent a chill through me. It wasn't just curiosity or suspicion. It was cold, calculated, like he was deciding what to do with me. I didn't wait to find out. I picked up my pace, almost running, and focused on reaching the trail. When I finally got to my car, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I threw my backpack in the back seat, jumped in, and locked the doors. I scanned the area one last time, expecting him to appear, but there was no one there. I started the engine and drove off as fast as I could without looking back. On the way home, I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror, convinced he might somehow be following me. It was irrational, but the feeling of being followed stayed with me. When I got back to town, I stopped at a coffee shop to try to calm down before going home. I sat by the window sipping a black coffee and watching people come and go. Every time someone walked in, my heart skipped a beat, but thankfully, he never showed up. Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal life, but something in me had changed. I started having recurring nightmares where I was trapped in that forest, unable to escape, with him watching me from the shadows. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in that black bag. Whether it was paranoia or instinct, I eventually called the local police to report what I'd witnessed. I didn't give them my name, just described the location and what I saw. They said they'd send someone to investigate, but I never heard anything about it again. To this day, I still wonder if it was something dangerous or if I'd misinterpreted everything. What scares me most, though, is thinking about what could have happened if I'd stayed in that forest one more night. I've always been the kind of person who preferred a good book or a board game over any outdoor adventure. But in the summer of 2018, my friends convinced me to step out of my comfort zone and join them on a hiking trip in Montana. At the time, I was recovering from a tough breakup and thought a few days disconnected from everything might be exactly what I needed. Our group was made up of 5 people: me, Jake, the self-proclaimed expedition leader, Sarah, who never stopped taking pictures, Ben, always telling scary stories to keep us entertained, and Emily, my best friend, who had the uncanny ability to turn any situation into a joke. The plan was simple: follow a marked trail, camp out for 2 nights, and then head back home. The first day went smoothly with breathtaking views, but things started to change when we stumbled upon that strange place. It was around 3 in the afternoon when we came across the cabin. It was partially hidden by tall trees, with rotting boards and broken windows that looked like empty eyes staring at us. But the most attention-grabbing thing was the message spray-painted on the door: "Keep out, do not stay after dark." The warning seemed recent, but the peeling paint on the walls and the overgrown grass around it made it clear that no one had lived there for years. Ben, of course, found it hilarious. He suggested we go inside to explore, but Jake shut the idea down, saying we were already behind schedule and needed to find a spot to set up camp. I can't explain it, but as soon as I saw the cabin, I felt this strange tightness in my chest. It was like the place emitted a heavy, oppressive energy that clung to my skin. Still, we moved on, though I noticed Sarah sneaking a few photos before we left. After walking for about another 30 minutes, we found a small clearing by a stream and decided to set up camp there. The spot seemed perfect. Fresh water, enough room for the tents, and a spectacular view of the sunset over the mountains. As we pitched our tents, Ben kept talking about the cabin. He speculated that the warning on the door was probably left by a hunter trying to keep people away. But Emily, maybe just to stir things up, said it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. I tried to tune out the conversation, but that tightness in my chest wouldn't go away. Sarah, on the other hand, was as excited as ever. She showed us the photos she'd taken, including some of the cabin. When she zoomed in on one of the images, I noticed something strange. A shadow in the corner of the broken window, as if someone had been inside watching us. She laughed it off, saying it was probably just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake it from my mind. As the sun began to set, the clearing was gradually enveloped in deeper shadows. The sound of the stream, which had been soothing earlier, now seemed too loud, drowning out any other noises from the forest. Sitting around the campfire, we talked about trivial things, trying to ignore the growing unease. That's when we first heard it, a whisper. It was so faint that I thought I was imagining it at first. But when I looked at Sarah, I could tell she'd heard it too. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her usually cheerful voice hesitant. Jake tried to brush it off, saying it was probably the wind, but the night was eerily still, with no breeze at all. We tried to ignore it and keep talking, but as the hours passed, the whispers returned, louder and clearer this time. They sounded like words, but in a language none of us recognized. Ben joked that it was some kind of ancient curse, but no one laughed. By then, the fear was beginning to creep in. Shortly after midnight, things took a turn for the worse. The shadows in the trees seemed to move in ways that didn't make sense. I blinked several times, trying to convince myself it was just the flickering light from the campfire. But something about it felt wrong. Emily, who was always the skeptical one, suddenly stood up and pointed to the edge of the clearing. "There's someone out there," she whispered. When we all looked, we didn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, like a weight pressing down on us. We decided to shine our flashlights into the woods, even though we were all terrified. As the beams of light swept through the darkness, we caught a brief glimpse of a figure among the trees. It was tall and thin, moving too fast to be human. Before anyone could react, it disappeared, as if it had never been there. After that, there was no pretending everything was okay. Jake tried to keep us calm, suggesting we get inside our tents and wait until sunrise, but no one wanted to be alone. We all squeezed into the biggest tent, trying to make as little noise as possible. The silence outside was almost unbearable, like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. And then the whispers started again, this time much closer. They seemed to come from all directions, blending with the sound of the stream and the rustling leaves. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every minute felt like an eternity, and any attempt to speak was met with desperate looks to stay quiet. It felt like any sound we made would draw whatever was out there straight to us. Then something touched the tent. It was faint, almost like a hand sliding over the fabric, but enough to freeze us in place. No one dared to move. I held my breath, waiting for another sound, but what came next was worse. The tent's zipper began to move, slowly being pulled down. Jake reacted quickly, grabbing a camping knife and shouting at whoever, or whatever, was outside. The zipper stopped, Moments later, we heard heavy footsteps circling the tent, as if something or someone was walking around us. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, barely audible. Jake nodded, but the truth was, none of us had the courage to step outside. Whatever was out there knew exactly where we were, and it seemed to be toying with us. Ben broke the silence, pointing to the corner of the tent where the fabric was starting to give, as if something was pressing against it from the outside. "That's not human," he muttered, his voice trembling. We decided we couldn't wait any longer. Jake quickly came up with a plan. We'd run to the car parked about a mile away, leaving all our gear behind. As soon as we agreed, he unzipped the tent in one swift motion and yelled for us to run. What I saw outside still haunts me. Shadows, tall and twisted, moving in impossible ways, like the air around them was bending. I didn't look back. All that mattered was running as fast as I could. As we bolted down the trail, the whispers followed us, growing louder and more chaotic, like a dissonant chorus. Sarah tripped once, but Jake pulled her up before she could fall completely. I could feel whatever it was getting closer, like an oppressive presence breathing down my neck. When we finally saw the car, it was like a lifeline. Ben reached the keys first and unlocked the doors. We scrambled in, and Jake wasted no time starting the engine and speeding down the narrow road, nearly veering off the path. In the rear-view mirror, I caught one last glimpse of the shadows, standing at the edge of the road, watching us leave. They didn't follow, but it was clear they had done enough to terrify us. The next morning, when we finally reached a gas station, everything felt like a blur. No one wanted to talk about what had happened, and we drove home in silence. Sarah, however, couldn't bring herself to delete the photos on her phone. When she finally looked through them, we saw something that made our blood run cold. In several pictures of the cabin, the shadows were already there, lurking in the distance, even before we noticed their presence. We never went back to Montana, and we all agreed never to share this story until now. I still have nightmares about the whispers and those distorted figures. And every time I think about it, I wonder if we should have listened to the warning on the cabin door. After all, it wasn't there by chance. I've always been passionate about camping, especially in remote places far from the hustle and bustle of the city. In the summer of 2019, I decided to take a week off to explore western Wyoming. I found an isolated lake surrounded by tall pines and mountains in the background. It was perfect. The plan was to disconnect completely, just me and nature. At the time, I was working as a freelance photographer, and these getaways were my way of recharging. I arrived at the spot at dawn, set up my tent near the lake's edge, and spent the day fishing and taking pictures. It felt like something out of a postcard, and the peace made me forget the outside world. Early in the afternoon, as I was building a small fire to cook the fish I'd caught, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the trail behind me. I turned around and saw a man stepping out of the woods. He was skinny, wearing worn hiking clothes, and carrying a backpack that looked far too old for an experienced adventurer. He greeted me with an odd, forced smile, and said he was lost. My gut told me to stay alert, but I kept my composure and offered him some food and water. He accepted but lingered nearby, looking at my campsite with an interest that made me uneasy. "Are you here alone?" he asked, and for some reason that question sent chills down my spine. I lied and said my group would be arriving later. Something in his expression made me think he knew I wasn't telling the truth. After he finished eating, I tried to guide him with some basic directions, pointing toward the main trail. He nodded but didn't seem in a hurry to leave. He kept asking increasingly personal questions. "Do you come to places like this often? How long are you staying here? And even, did you bring any weapons with you?" That last one made me deeply uncomfortable. Who asks something like that? I tried to act casual while tidying up the campsite, hoping he'd take the hint. Eventually, he said he'd leave but stood there for a moment as if expecting something. Finally, he grabbed his backpack, gave a short nod, and disappeared down the trail he came from. For a while, I managed to convince myself it was just a weird encounter. But as the sun started to set, the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. I went to the lake to fetch some water and noticed fresh footprints near the shore. They weren't mine. They led in the opposite direction of where he'd supposedly gone. That made me tense, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had taken a shortcut. Back at the campsite, I forced myself to stick to my routine, cooked my food and got into my tent early, but I couldn't relax. Every so often, I thought I heard footsteps, but the sound was so faint it could have been my imagination, or small animals. Only later, when the night had fully fallen, did the feeling of being watched become unbearable. Around 10 at night, while I was trying to sleep, I heard what sounded like a branch snapping near the tent. My heart raced. I sat up in silence, holding my breath, straining to hear more. For a moment everything went quiet, but then I heard another crack, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly, shining the light outside. At first I didn't see anything, just the dark forest and the lake reflecting the beam of my flashlight. But something felt off. The smell. It was like old sweat mixed with wet dirt, something that definitely wasn't there before. I swept the flashlight around, trying to convince myself there was nothing out there. That's when I saw it, just on the edge of the light, a figure standing still among the trees. I couldn't make out much detail, but it looked human, motionless, as if it was watching me. I tried speaking. "Who's there?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, but there was no reply. The silence was more terrifying than any words could have been. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, like a shadow among the trunks. Then my flashlight started flickering, blinking a few times before shutting off completely, leaving me in total darkness. I zipped the tent back up with trembling hands and grabbed my pocket knife, the only weapon I had. I thought about running to the car, but it was parked a good 15 minutes down the trail. Worse, I'd have to pass near the spot where I saw that figure. So I stayed inside, sitting with the knife in my hand, trying not to make a sound. Minutes felt like hours. Every little noise outside seemed amplified. The wind in the trees, dry leaves rustling, even the gentle sound of water on the lake. Then, suddenly, I heard footsteps. They weren't light, like those of a small animal. They were heavy, deliberate, and circling the tent. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to stay calm, but my whole body was on high alert. The footsteps stopped right outside. And then a voice. Low, almost a whisper, but clear enough to make my blood run cold. "You shouldn't be here." That's when adrenaline took over. My first reaction was to yell something, anything, to try and scare it off. "Get out of here! I called the police, and they're on their way." Of course, it was a lie, but I needed to buy time. The response was absolute silence. No more footsteps, no more sounds. I unzipped a small part of the tent to peek outside, clutching the knife so hard my hands hurt. But there was no one there. The area around the tent was empty, like nothing had ever been there. The weird thing was that the footsteps hadn't faded. They had just stopped. I zipped the tent back up and sat there trying to make sense of what was happening. But the only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't alone. A few moments later, I heard something even more disturbing. A whistle. It wasn't a normal whistle, the kind someone uses to get attention or pass the time. It was slow, melodic, but somehow wrong, like each note was deliberately chosen to unsettle. It came from somewhere to my left, near the lake. My whole body tensed up, but I knew I had to see what was going on. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the spare flashlight from my bag and unzipped the tent carefully. The light illuminated the damp ground and the edge of the forest, but the whistling stopped the second I poked my head out. My eyes scanned the area, but everything seemed still. Then I saw something that made me freeze. On the closest tree, just a few feet away, there were scratch marks, as if someone had clawed at the trunk hard enough to tear off chunks of bark. My legs barely worked as I forced myself to step out of the tent. I needed to grab my things and get out of there as quickly as possible. I walked over to my backpack, which I'd hung on a branch, but when I grabbed it, I noticed something strange. It was open. I was absolutely sure I'd closed it before going into the tent. Rummaging through it quickly, I found that some items were out of place, and worse, my phone was missing. Panic began to creep in. I looked around trying to decide what to do. My only option was to head for the car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence around me was suffocating, as if the whole world had stopped breathing along with me. With the flashlight in hand, I started walking toward the trail that led to the car. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. The wet dirt beneath my boots made soft noises, and I tried to move as quietly as possible, but the forest seemed to amplify every sound I made. As I walked, I got the unmistakable feeling that something was following me, staying just out of sight to my right. It was like an invisible shadow moving between the trees. Every 10 steps, I stopped and shined the light around, but I never saw anything. Still, the feeling of being followed wouldn't go away. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I heard something that nearly made me collapse in fear. The same voice as before, but now closer, whispering, "You won't escape." It was so low it seemed to be spoken directly into my ear. But when I turned the flashlight in that direction, there was no one there. Tears began streaming down my face, but I kept moving, almost running along the trail. The whistling started again, this time ahead of me, as if whatever it was, whatever it wanted, was toying with me, controlling where I went. The flashlight shook in my hands, and the path to the car felt endless. I didn't even know if I was still going the right way, or just getting more lost in the forest. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the faint reflection of my car's headlights through the trees. Relief almost made me stumble, but I forced myself to keep moving, trying to stay as quiet as possible. When I reached the car, I unlocked the doors quickly and jumped into the driver's seat. I was about to turn the key in the ignition when something made me stop. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement. A shadow darted quickly behind the car, running from one side to the other. I froze, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. For a second, I considered just flooring it, but the thought of hitting that thing, whatever it was, terrified me even more. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the passenger side window. I didn't have the courage to look, but the force of the hit shook the entire car. Heavy breathing started fogging up the glass, slow and rhythmic, as if whoever, or whatever it was watching me from outside. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I turned my head slowly, only to find nothing there. The breathing stopped as abruptly as it started, but before I could process it, something slammed against the rear window. That was enough to snap me out of my trance. I turned the key in the ignition, and the car hesitated for what felt like an eternity before starting. The moment the engine roared to life, I slammed my foot on the gas and tore out of there, not caring what might be in my way. As I sped down the narrow trail, the car jolted violently over rocks and roots, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. Even so, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped, but then I saw something that made my breath catch. At the edge of the headlight's glow, something was running after me. It wasn't human. The thing had a strange way of moving, like it was stumbling and lunging forward at the same time, impossibly fast. It was tall, thin, and its eyes, glowing like an animal's, stared straight at me. I didn't know if I was hallucinating or if it was really there, but I pressed the gas pedal even harder, risking losing control of the car. When I finally reached the main road, whatever it was stopped at the edge of the forest. I only caught its silhouette for a second before it vanished into the trees. My whole body was trembling, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I kept driving for hours, not daring to stop until I reached a small town. There, I parked at a gas station, stumbled into the convenience store, and asked for help. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy, but let me use the phone to call a friend. I've never gone camping again after that day. To this day, I don't know what I encountered at that lake, but sometimes I still hear that whistle in my dreams. And whenever I do, I wake up with the same feeling of being watched. It's like that thing never really left. I've always been the kind of person who prefers staying behind the camera. Photography is my escape, you know? I work a regular office job during the day, but on free nights and weekends, I'm always out with my camera, exploring remote places in search of the perfect shot. That's how, in the summer of 2019, I decided to spend a night in an abandoned fire lookout tower I'd read about on some online forums. The plan was simple: capture a time-lapse of the stars, far away from light pollution. It wasn't my first time camping alone, but the isolation there felt different. The tower, located deep in the Appalachian forest, looked like something out of an old storybook, with its weathered structure and moss-covered windows. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sky painted orange as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The trail to the tower was longer than I'd expected, and by the time I got there, I was exhausted. The structure had a strange charm, almost melancholic, with creaking stairs that complained under each step as I climbed. At the top, the view was surreal. The silence was broken only by the rustling of the trees, and occasionally, the distant call of some animal. I set up my camera and started adjusting the settings for the time-lapse. Time flew as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, but around 10 p.m. I noticed something strange. The wind carried a peculiar sound, like someone whispering my name, but that was impossible. At least, I thought it was. At first I tried to shrug it off, blaming it on the wind and my imagination. You trick yourself a lot when you're alone in the middle of nowhere. I kept working on the camera and took a break to eat a sandwich I'd packed. But as the minutes passed, the whispers became more frequent. They weren't constant, you know. They came in bursts, blending with the sound of the wind, and they always seemed far off, as if coming from the base of the tower. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but I realized I was paying more attention to the dark forest than to the stars. The silence around me began to feel heavy, like something was slowly closing in. I stood up to check the windows just to make sure no animals or, I don't know, people were trying to climb up. There was nothing, just the endless darkness of the forest below. But as I looked closer, I saw something that made me freeze for a moment. A series of handprints, small and damp, smeared on the inside of the glass. They hadn't been there before. I was certain because one of the first things I did when I arrived was clean the windows to ensure a clear view for my photos. I stood there, staring at those prints, trying to make sense of them. They looked fresh, like someone had just pressed their hands against the glass. But I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. My first instinct was to grab the flashlight sitting next to my backpack. The beam shook slightly in my hand. Nerves, I guess. But the tower was empty, just as it should have been. I even tried convincing myself that I could have made those marks without realizing it while setting up my gear. But that didn't add up. The prints were smaller than my hands, like they belonged to someone much younger, maybe a child. That thought made my chest tighten. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize, and glanced outside, shining the flashlight down toward the forest below. Just the rustling trees. Nothing else. And then the sounds started again. This time they weren't distant whispers. They were footsteps. Short, light steps, like someone walking around the base of the tower. I walked over to the stairs, aiming the flashlight down, illuminating the steps descending into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice came out louder than I expected, almost comical as it echoed in the stillness. no answer. The footsteps stopped immediately, which in a way was scarier than hearing something back. It was as if whoever, or whatever, was out there now knew I was paying attention. I went back inside the tower, trying to stay calm. Every instinct I had told me to pack up and leave. But the idea of walking the trail in the pitch-black darkness, with the sound of those footsteps fresh in my memory, felt even worse. Plus, I'm stubborn, and part of me wanted to believe it was all just a big misunderstanding. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because I was tired. But the uneasiness grew with each passing minute. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, staring at the door, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being watched. Then I heard another noise, much closer this time. A soft tapping on the window behind me. It sounded like someone lightly scraping their nails against the glass, almost as if they were giving me a warning. I spun around quickly, flashlight in hand, but all I saw was the beam reflecting off the glass. It was as if the darkness outside was too thick for the light to cut through. I stood up slowly, approaching the window, and that's when I saw it. New handprints, but this time they weren't just small. They were much higher up than I could reach. It was as if something much larger than me was hanging on the outside, touching the glass. My whole body froze. It didn't make sense. The window was about 10 feet off the ground, and there was nothing outside for anyone to climb on. My stomach churned as I stepped back, keeping the flashlight fixed on the handprints. The thought that something that big could be out there, hidden in the darkness, was worse than anything I could have imagined. And the worst part? Everything was completely silent now, which somehow made it even creepier. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed in the tower, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. There was something behind me. I didn't see it, but I felt it. The air got heavier, as if the entire space had shrunk around me. I turned so quickly I nearly tripped over my backpack, pointing the flashlight toward the opposite corner of the room. For a split second, I swear I saw movement, like a shadow darting into the darkest part of the tower where the light couldn't reach. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I only managed to move when a deep sound, like deliberate scratching, echoed through the wooden floor below me. Without thinking, I grabbed my backpack and bolted for the stairs, refusing to look back. Climbing down those stairs felt like it took forever. The flashlight trembled in my hand, lighting only a few steps ahead as I focused on staying steady. With every step, the sound of scratching seemed to follow me, coming from above, as though something was watching me and moving slowly. I couldn't bring myself to look up. I was too afraid of confirming what my mind was already imagining. When I finally reached the bottom and stepped onto the forest floor, the silence outside was deafening. Even the wind had stopped. The only sound I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Without hesitating, I started walking quickly along the trail I had hiked earlier in the day. The forest felt different at night, like the trees had closed in, making the path narrower. No matter how hard I tried to focus on the trail ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The worst part came when I glanced back, just out of reflex, and saw something that made my blood run cold. At the top of the tower, a figure was clinging to the outside, its body twisted in ways that didn't look human. I couldn't make out the face or details, but its arms were far too long, and its head tilted at an impossible angle. I froze for a second before a loud crack from the trail ahead snapped me out of it. That sound was all it took to get me moving again. I didn't wait to see what had caused it. I started running down the trail, ignoring the branches that scraped my face and the noises that now seemed to come from every direction. It was like something, or many things, were moving with me, hidden in the trees. For a brief moment, I thought I heard muffled laughter, but it could have just been my imagination. The flashlight began to flicker, its beam cutting in and out, which only made everything worse. With each flicker, the shadows seemed to shift, creeping closer. When I finally saw my car parked at the trailhead, I felt a brief wave of relief, but I didn't slow down. My legs were burning, my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I kept running until I reached the car door. I jumped in, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. The forest outside was completely dark now, as though all the light had been drained away. With shaky hands, I started the engine and threw the car into reverse without even looking properly. I just wanted to get out of there. As I backed up, I caught one last glimpse of the trail in the headlights. For a moment I thought I saw that figure again, standing among the trees, watching me. But I didn't stay to confirm. I drove off as fast as the car could go. I drove for nearly an hour without stopping, just trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that place. Even inside the car, with the doors locked and the headlights lighting the road ahead, I couldn't feel safe. Every so often, I glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something chasing me, but the road behind stayed empty. My mind was racing. I tried to think rationally, but the handprints, the footsteps, and that thing on top of the tower, there was no explanation that wasn't terrifying. When I finally reached a small town, I pulled into a gas station and just sat there in the car, trying to calm down. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I was being followed by something I couldn't even understand? I ended up just sitting there, staring at the forest in the distance, trying to convince myself that I was safe. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. I've never gone back to that tower or the Appalachian Trail. And no matter how much I try to forget, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that I'm still being watched. Maybe it's paranoia, but sometimes I swear I hear those whispers again, as if the wind is calling my name.